Good morning, everybody. I'm Kathleen Larmet, NCURA's Executive Director, and I'd like to welcome those of you here with me at the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas to the NIH Fundamentals Workshop. I'd also like to welcome those of you who are with us virtually at the 151 universities that have registered for today's workshop. We've got an exciting morning to be with you and a great workshop. Some of the items that we'll be learning about today, we'll be doing everything from the overall structure and culture of NIH to developing and submitting NIH proposals, the merit review process, post-award administration, and we may even learn a few tips and tricks. We're hoping. We have three experts with us today, and they just also happen to be outstanding teachers, so we're really, really lucky. All the way to the right, we have Dee Doherty, Deputy Grants Management Officer at the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Disease. Welcome, Dee. We have Michelle Bulls, Director, Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration at the NIH. Welcome, Michelle. And we have Kristen Ta, Grants Policy Analyst at the Grants Policy Division at the NIH. So sit back. You're in for a treat. This is an excellent, excellent workshop, and we're thrilled to have you with us. I'm going to turn things over now to Michelle.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So just to let you guys know, we've done a lot of changes to the slides, so we'll make sure that you get the updates as soon as we get through with the, not the presentation, but beyond the conference. So we'll make sure you have those. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction just to kind of go through the NIH and how it's set up, and the Office of Extramural Research, which is where my office falls under, so we'll just start there. So, of course, we know that this is the nation's steward over biomedical and behavioral research, and that is what we do, that is who we are. We have a large campus that's filled with both intramural scientists as well as our extramural experts. NIH is the agency that falls under the Department of Health and Human Services, so that's what your HHS stands for. And the Department of Health and Human Services has 11 operating and staff divisions, which includes NIH. NIH is the only biomedical research agency under the Department of Health and Human Services. So we call ourselves unique and different. But while we are what we call the largest agency in terms of volume of grants, we don't necessarily give out the most money because much of the money and funding and grants and cooperative agreements falls under the block programs and the formula programs, which is CMS, of course, and ACF. And CMS is the Agency for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So they don't have as many grants, but the number and the funding is huge. We have a lot of grants that we fund, but the numbers are lower in comparison. So NIH by the numbers, for FY18, our budget, of course, was $36.4 billion, and we issued 52,643 grant awards that totaled $27.1 billion, and we did that in grants and cooperative agreements. Under our peer review system, there were 73,608 applications that were reviewed, and the success rate out of that number is 22%. So you can see that peer review process is extremely what you call lean and mean. We have standing criteria by which we use. We are very focused on making sure that the peer review process upholds the integrity of our funding, and so that 22.7% success rate kind of demonstrates that. And then, of course, the awards that were made were over 2,600 recipients, which would be yourselves. So we have a lot of data sources that we use to calculate and look at metrics and all that kind of thing when we're talking about statistics and the number of grant awards we make, the applications, how they're reviewed, that kind of thing. So we wanted to make sure that you guys have an understanding of what that data book looks like, and that provides the summary of statistics for our grant and contracts. That doesn't include our other transaction awards, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Reporter is a really great tool that we know that your faculty uses, and you guys as well probably, which really has a lot of good detailed NIH information. You can search on institutions, how much funding one institution gets over another. It's just a really great tool to identify metrics and to get, a lot of detailed information. And then, of course, we have the RCDC, which is the data on the NIH projects by category. And it's by category. When we say that, we mean the scientific categories. NIH is the National Institutes of Health. So you all always hear us talk about how NIH gets this, we have a large increase in our funding. And that's the overarching funding. But what we have to understand is there are 27 different institutes and centers that fall under the NIH. And each of those institutes and centers has its own annual appropriations. So when we are putting out information about the funding and the budget, typically it's at the central level, and it doesn't give you the details on how much funding has been allocated to each institute and center. Out of the 27 institutes and centers, we have 3, which are NIH's Clinical Center, the CIT, which is our IT, Center for Information and Technology, and CSR, which is the Center for Scientific Review, that have no funding authority. We also have the Office of the Director, where a lot of funding comes in to fund special initiatives within the NIH infrastructure. But the funding and the scientific topics are administered at different institutes and centers. But those 4 don't really have the funding authority, so you don't have a grants management shop there. That's done within the other 24 different institutes and centers. The way in which we provide funding for our research is to issue grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, and now we are into the other transaction authority business. As I stated, out of the 27, 24 of the institutes and centers fund research, and it's really based on their missions and the priorities and special initiatives and funding and budget strategies that fall under the different institutes and centers. Within 2017, we awarded 44,389 research grants, and cooperative agreements was in the 3,000s and low. And the research and development contracts, of course, was in the high 1,000s. So within NIH, and a part of the Office of the Director, there is the OER, which we call the Office of Extramural Research Mission. And we'll make sure that we get all of these acronyms spelled out for you guys. We live within our own little NIH infrastructure world, so we have all these acronyms and we put them in slides, and we don't you know what OER? That's going to be a test at the end. So, and then I probably will be the first to fail. But anyway, we do provide a corporate framework for NIH's research administration. That's where that administrative body is that provides the services under policies and compliance and inventions and patents and everything having to do with administrivia at the NIH. So that's our portfolio, and we'll go into that a little bit. So the Office of Extramural Research Organization looks exactly like you see it here. We have the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, OLAW. And while OLAW is under the NIH umbrella, OLAW provides services to all of the federal agencies and has a nice little memorandum of understanding with different ones, such as NSF, with our good friend Jean Feldman and her agency. So while it sits at NIH, they really do provide a wealth of services to all other agencies, as well as other agencies within the department. The Office of Research Information Centers is where we would identify the data book, reporter, the metrics, and all those kinds of things. That's their function. The Electronic Research Administration, which is ERA, provides the commons, features, and functions, as well as our grants management systems. They also house our RCDC, and they have the central functions for accepting reports from our institutions. The NIH Guide is where you find your funding opportunity announcements. It's the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and that's where you apply for your grants, and Kristen will go through all of those websites with you guys so that you can kind of see what that looks like. And then we have our Human Subjects Research function, where we provide policies and updates and looking at the human subjects research policies and compliance functions. The Division of Biomedical Research Workforce is where we house our training functions for policies, training grants, fellowships, career awards, and that sort of thing. Those are our experts there, and we work very closely with them in the implementation of those policies. We have the Division of Communications and Outreach. That's where you probably see the nexus from Dr. Mike Lauer. They provide those kinds of services for us. They do a lot of internal and external communications, and we work very closely with them as we're issuing guide notices. We have the policy speak. Well, the Division of Communication and Outreach kind of does the plain language version. So we try to keep the policies in the regulatory realm, and then they say, well, someone outside of your office needs to understand what that means, and they translate it for us. So we appreciate them for that. And then we have the Biomedical Entrepreneurship and Innovation section, which is where our SBIR, STTR program resides. And then we have the immediate office of the director, which Dr. Mike Lauer is the director for OER. And Dr. Lauer has several functions under his immediate office. That's where your review officer is housed, the program officer, and a couple of other special functions. And then you have OPRA, which is my office under the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, where we provide a lot of policies, a lot of compliance functions, and we provide that to the entire NIH enterprise as well as yourselves. So I want to kind of walk through who our partners are within OPRA, because a lot of times what happens is NIH puts out the policies, and it seems as though we're changing policies quite often. Would you not agree? And so a lot of times I think maybe the recipients think that all we do is sit up and try to think about ways to make your lives harder. And I promise you that one of the main functions that I try to instill in my staff is whenever we're trying to put out a policy, we need to identify ways to relieve the administrative burden. I'm always trying to see if we can clump policies, and so we did it this year. Can we wait for another 3 years to implement something else so that we can get you guys accustomed to what's going on now and not preparing you for things that are going to happen ahead or having them all collide. It's just hard to keep up, and we do realize that. We also know that your systems and your internal processes are impacted by the number of policies that we put out and the frequency of them. But sometimes there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of how and when we put these policies out. So I wanted to just paint a picture for you all as to how this looks for us and why it impacts you all so often. So we have you guys, of course, as our applicants and our recipients as partners. We have professional societies such as the Council on Governmental Relations and ARI, which are research institutions, nonprofit research institutions, and AAU and AAMC and all of these different partners that have your best interests at heart and identify policies that may be burdensome, policies that may need to be tweaked, and those sorts of things. So we engage with them. We have HHS, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, where we sit, and lots of times when policies come out or requirements come out, the department requires us to implement them. And so what we do is we spend a lot of time in meetings going back and forth with the department to try to identify, to say, this is not a community service-based grant. These are biomedical research grants. And when we implement the policies, they need to make sense to us and to our constituents. And so we spend a lot of time really fighting to make sure that those policies make sense and that those policies are things that we can implement and not place the burden on you. There's a very different function from a community-based grant to a research grant. And so what we've successfully done is we're leading with NSF, OMB, and the Office of Science and Technology, the Research Business Models subcommittee that's under the OSTP, where we can gather data and work with our partners within the research community to do or couple policies that make sense for you guys and kind of pull away from those community-based requirements. HHS has been very lenient in allowing us to lead those efforts, but still lots of times other things come out that just we just don't have any control over, such as when Congress identifies issues or challenges with clinical trials, we'll just say. And the need for us to, enhance transparency and oversight for clinical trials. Then, of course, NIH is forced to identify ways to do that and implement policies that obviously impact you guys. We work very closely with the Office of General Counsel, which is our legal arm, to try to make sure that whatever policies that we implement, whatever compliance programs that we implement, we are able to protect you all as well as the federal interests. We work with the Office of Inspector General. Well, we don't necessarily work with them, but, well, I guess we do. I'm on camera. Yeah, we work with the Office of Inspector General. We partner with them, and we try to do everything that they suggest that we do. Yeah. And then we work with the Department of Justice to, identify ways. So, for instance, we have scenarios where there is a compliance action that's taken against an institution. The institution, as you all know, have the right to appeal post-award. So we have our appeals process where our institutions can appeal to the first level, which would be my office. And then if I agree, we go forward. If not, we send it down to the department, which is the Department Appeals Board. And sometimes under KETAM cases, we have to work with the Department of Justice to make sure that any appeals that we overturn or any appeals that we uphold are legal and will enforce the rights of the recipient as well as protect NIH's interests. We work with the Office of Management and Budget, which is the executive office of the president, trying to implement some of the initiatives and some of the policies and statutes that come forth from the OMB. Then we have the Office of Management Assessment. We work closely with them. They are kind of our policy hub, and they do investigations for fraud, waste, and abuse, as well as research misconduct and that sort of thing. And then, of course, we work very closely with our institutes and centers. Like we have Dee Doherty here. That's a part of our extramural staff. We try to provide sound oversight to the ICs. We also partner with the ICs because the ICs are that organization, that arm that is your operational function. You guys work very closely with the grants management officials there, the grants operations, the program staff, and that kind of thing. So we try to stay very connected with our institutes and centers so that there's that central theme, and we're trying to sing from the same sheet of music most often. I'm going to move into the awarding instruments and kind of talk to you about what the differences are and the main focus for each. So, as you all know, grants are financial assistance. And we have grants, which we issue the grant and we turn away, you guys go and do good things. You have reporting requirements, financial, programmatic, and we don't bother you, you guys deliver, and that's great. What we also have are cooperative agreements. And so a cooperative agreement is a grant. It directly benefits the public, and it's used when an IC. So I'm jumping ahead. So the grant, wait, look, I'm jumping ahead because I know the stuff. So you guys are looking at this, and I'm all the way down the street. Okay, so the grant is you don't need substantial programmatic oversight, and we provide the money to an eligible entity to carry out the approved project. Went there. The categories of activities that are funded using grants, and we listed them in categories. And the reason why we did it, because we have 1,000,001 activity codes. You guys know that. And so how we are demonstrating this today is these are our budget category codes that we use when we are issued or allocated funds from Congress that's issued down from OMB, allotted to us. These are these categories that we actually report back up to the OMB and Congress about. These are the research projects, small business, training and fellowships, constructions, shared instrumentation programs, center grants, which are our complex programs, as well as conference support and clinical trials. And while we might have 1,000,000 activity codes under each of these categories, these are the main categories by which, when Congress allocates the funding to us, we need to report back up as to how much money we spent within each of these categories. And that's really important because we do have to give an accounting for what Congress has allocated to us. So for the cooperative agreements, you guys already know this because I talked about it before when I shouldn't have been talking about it, right? This is the financial assistance mechanism. Again, direct benefit is to the public. And it's a grant. It's not even similar to. It is a grant, but the difference is it will have that substantial programmatic involvement in the project where the project officer, either the program official or the program scientist, is working very closely with the principal investigators to come up with the holistic outcomes of the project. They're very involved with the program design, and they're very involved with the outcomes of these programs. So this is not where we hand the money, you go out and do great things and then report. This is us partnering with you all step by step all the way, making sure that the program design and the outcomes are directly beneficial and to the public, but we have that input, and that's very important. That's a very distinct difference between just the grant and the cooperative agreement. We use funding opportunities to announce the responsibilities that NIH staff will have as opposed to the recipient. The funding opportunity announcement provides a high-level roles and responsibilities. Typically, you'll find the details within your terms and conditions of the award, so it's very important for you all to pay attention to what is outlined in the terms and conditions of the award and not really just focus on what was outlined in that funding opportunity announcement. The reason why is because quickly in a cooperative agreement, you can be out of compliance when you're having that direct, substantial involvement with the feds. So for a contract, unlike the grants and the cooperative agreements, they are this acquisition mechanism, and they're not considered financial assistance. And when we use a contract, that's a direct benefit to the federal government. We are acquiring services, and we are paying for those services, which is different from the grant and the cooperative agreement mechanism. It's obviously, because it's a direct benefit to us, it's government initiated by us. We initiate the RFP, we identify the scope of work, and then we work through it to identify the company that can provide us with that service. One of the things I was going to say is that NIH is truly just a grants and cooperative agreement financial assistance hub. So we don't do a lot of contracts, but the ones that we do are very high dollar and extremely important to provide the services to make our grants and our cooperative agreements work well. So I've talked a little bit earlier about the other transactions, and this is a new mechanism that we've embarked upon. You guys may be familiar with some of our STRIDE programs and All of Us programs that we've used other transactions to fund. It's not a grant, it's not a cooperative agreement, and it's not a contract. Okay, Michelle, if it's not any of that, what is it? Well, I will say that it is a mechanism that provides a lot of flexibility to both the agency as well as to the recipients. And one would think, we hear all the time about how our financial assistance programs create so much work and how it has all of these rules and regulations. And the agency is, you know, Michelle Bull says we can't do this. Her staff says we can't do that. What can we do when we're issuing grants and cooperative agreements? So we thought, wow, this would be a great thing. The other transaction authorities provide all this flexibility, and we're sitting in the meeting with the IC directors, and we're saying, look at this wonderful new opportunity where you can issue these this mechanism, this awarding mechanism, and you don't have a lot of rules and regulations, and you know, you can kind of design the program the way you want to. It provides great flexibility. I mean, you know, engaging non-traditional partners, engaging non-traditional partners in new ways. It ebbs and flows. It needs to be nimble, and that's really all it needs to be. And what do we hear? Crickets. We don't want any parts of that. Why? Because it doesn't have a lot of rules and regulations. Well, we thought that's what you wanted. But in all honesty, it really is a very interesting mechanism. We are using it a lot more broadly across the enterprise now. Dr. Collins has been given a broader authority by Congress to use this mechanism. It's a mechanism where you'll see the program design in a very different, unique way. And honestly, there's no standard. Each program has designed its own program, the way they want to implement the science. in very different ways. You have some that stick very closely to the grant field. You have some that stick closely to the contracts field, and then you have some that just really have maximized the flexibility within this awarding instrument. You're able to negotiate the terms and conditions. You're able to spur innovation. It's kind of one of those mechanisms where you get in and get out. You don't necessarily see them as 5-year, 4-year, 5-year projects. Typically, they're your 1 to 3 year projects, maybe 3 years. But the other side to that is the other transactions. If the project is not going in the way that the design has identified, in the middle of the design, you can turn and do something much different than where you started. It doesn't require a lot of that prior approval. It requires a lot of negotiations with the program officials. The dollars can ebb and flow. If you're doing a study in one area, not getting the quick hit that you need in that area, they'll take that money and move it into another area. And it's just a really interesting program. And so I encourage you guys to be on the lookout for the opportunities. We have some opportunities that will be coming available. And so maybe just kind of reading the funding opportunity announcement to familiarize yourself with it would be a great thing. But our office has taken a very interesting approach. This kind of fell in our laps. And I think I would say it's been a really neat opportunity for us to just kind of develop the program policies. And, even so folks would say, oh, so, does the NIH grants policy statement apply? Nope. Does the 45 CFR Part 75 grant regulations apply? Nope. Does Title II apply? Title II CFR 200? Nope. The only thing that does apply are the program policies and the way the program officials design them. We have to have special authorization to issue these from Congress, and we've gotten that. The way in which you use your cost principles, we give you guidance, but we don't necessarily give you what's allowable and what's unallowable because it depends on the program. One program might allow something, the other program might not. So it's really very unique and very tailored. I'm going to give you guys just kind of an NIH bird's eye view of partners in the grant process. We have our recipients, the Office of Sponsored Projects and the faculty. And then, of course, at NIH, it's the Center for Scientific Review, our funding ICs, and the Office of the Director, where your policies and compliance functions lie. The NIH grants life cycle is pretty much the same across the federal spectrum. Planning is critical. I tell our program officials that financial planning is very critical because it really does set the tone and the foundation for a successful project in the out years. When we plan, we're able to put out funding opportunities that are very, very clear and help you guys apply in a way that will yield success. We have the apply functions, of course. Once the opportunity is out, you guys have an opportunity to apply to meet the criteria. Then we move into our peer review functions of the applications. And then we have the pre-award process, which is very important because we have there our risk management reviews, making certain that once we make that award, we put all the risk management pieces in place so that we don't find ourselves on the back end having to take action against the institution. We try to partner with you guys to make sure that those pre-award risk management pieces are identified and worked through from the beginning. And then, of course, you have the notice of award, and we'll have a lot of discussion about what that looks like and how important it is for the terms and conditions. Then we have the award management, where you have the program official, the faculty, yourselves, and the grants management officials working as a team to make sure that reports and requirements are met throughout that process, throughout the life cycle of the grant, and then close out. I'm going to stop and turn it over to Kristen, where she will go through the website. I neglected to mention I'm going to step out, and then I'm going to come back in and join you guys and sit down and learn with you. Thank you.
Okay, so Michelle gave us a great kind of bird's eye view of NIH, the big picture. And now I'm going to kind of start diving into the life cycle a little bit with the application process. And so before we start, I just wanted to show you, this is our grants.nih.gov website. It's basically the go-to place for all of the information you could possibly need about NIH grants. So you'll go here to find funding opportunity announcements, to find your application packages. If you want to look at NIH Reporter, as Michelle was talking about, to get some information about active awards and projects that exist, you can see that here. We also have our policy and compliance information, and then there's specific resources targeted to the different kinds of folks that we work with. So the actual PIs, research administrators like you guys, peer reviewers, small businesses, anything you could possibly need is going to be here on this website. So how do you submit an NIH grant application? Your PI has an idea, they want an NIH award, and they're not quite sure where to start. So all applications that come into NIH must come in through what we call a funding opportunity announcement, which is basically our way of notifying the public that we're interested in a specific area of science, we have money available, and you should submit applications to us to be considered for funding. All of our FOAs are published in the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and I'm going to pull that up and walk you through it just a little bit in a couple of minutes. And first, I'm just going to explain a little bit about the different types of funding opportunity announcements that you'll see in the guide. And so those are program announcements. A new type of FOA that we're seeing a lot more lately is notices of special interest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We also have program announcements with review criteria, specific review criteria, as well as requests for applications. So to start, I'll give a little background on our program announcements. So program announcements are broad announcements which notify the research community of a new or expanded research interest area. And these can be specific to one NIH institute or center, or they can have multiple institutes, or they can be NIH-wide. And that information will be in the funding opportunity announcement. So applications submitted to these broad announcements are typically reviewed in our NIH Center for Scientific Review. And some of the program announcements are actually what we call parent program announcements. So these are extremely broad, and they're essentially available for investigators to submit unsolicited applications. So for example, the R01 parent application, most of our ICs are on that, and investigators can submit basically any proposal that covers an area of science under one of those ICs. So they're extremely broad. Notices of special interest are something we've started using recently in the past couple of years. So the program announcements that we issue, it's very burdensome for NIH to develop those opportunities, get them through the entire review process, and issue them. And so as a way of streamlining our FOA review process, we've developed notices of special interest. So instead of a full funding opportunity announcement, these are guide notices that we publish, which just highlight a specific interest or area of science. So they'll identify the specific area that they're interested in, and they'll direct applicants to actually submit their application through an existing program announcement that's already been published. So you would comply with all of the requirements of the program announcement, but it's targeted toward a specific scientific area. And the way that those are submitted is you're going to put the notice number in your application. And I'll show you an example of one of these announcements in a minute so that you can see what that looks like. And then we also have program announcements with special review criteria. So these are PARs. So like our program announcements, they are pretty general. But however, these will often contain special review criteria. So they have some specifics that wouldn't normally be captured in a regular program announcement. For example, it might be a program that's targeted toward increasing diversity in training programs. And so they would have special review criteria for the diversity plan, recruitment diversity plan, to ensure that that's captured in the application. And these can be reviewed either by the individual funding institute or by the Center for Scientific Review. And these don't have special set-aside funds, so they do have special review criteria, but they're still just part of the general broad budget for that institute or center for the year. And the last type of FOA that I'm going to touch on is a request for application. So these are extremely specific. They're used usually by an individual IC or just a couple of ICs to invite applications in a very defined scientific research area that reflects the IC's priorities. These include specific review criteria. They often have specific eligibility criteria, and they're going to be peer reviewed most often at the institute or center that's going to be making the awards. And so these will often have specific terms and conditions. Basically, they're much more detailed and intensive than a typical program announcement. And for requests for applications, you'll see in the announcement, it will announce that there are funds set aside for the program. It'll tell you how much and how many awards they anticipate being able to make with the announcement. And one thing that's important to keep in mind for all of our funding opportunity announcements is whether or not your research project is a clinical trial. So all applications that involve one or more clinical trials have to come in through a funding opportunity announcement that specifically allows clinical trials. And you can see that by looking at the FOA title, as well as in section 2, it will specify. And so in the title, you'll see clinical trial not allowed, clinical trial required, clinical trial optional, and those will let you know whether you're able to submit to that funding opportunity announcement. The last one here is a very specific category, basic experimental studies with humans, BESH. You may have heard about this. It's a pretty particular area. These are studies that meet both our definition of a clinical trial as well as meeting the definition, the federal definition of basic research. So they don't have a specific product or process in mind during the trial. And we were directed by Congress to implement some flexibilities for these types of applications. So you'll see specific funding opportunity announcements that are highlighted to capture those trials. Okay. And so what types of entities are eligible for NIH awards? So in general, the following types of organizations can apply for NIH grants: nonprofit research organizations, for-profits, institutions of higher education, which is probably where most of you guys fall, hospitals, governments, federal institutions, and foreign institutions. However, as I'm going to say a lot throughout this presentation, it's really critical to look at your funding opportunity announcement because there may be specific eligibility requirements there as well. And as part of getting ready to look at the FOAs and submit your information, it's really critical that the PIs and you folks at the departments and in the research offices have up-to-date information in ERA Commons. So the profile information in ERA Commons is going to pull directly into your application. It will qualify PIs for things like early stage or new investigator status. So it's really critical for both you and the PIs to emphasize to them that they should always have their most up-to-date information in the ERA Commons profile. The profile is something where us NIH folks, we can't really edit this information for you, so it really needs to be maintained at the institution level. All right, so I'm going to hop out of the presentation and actually show you the NIH guide before we move forward. So I'll just talk a little bit about the NIH guide maybe while you pull it up. Okay, so the NIH guide, you can see it on the slide here. That you're able to search by funding institute or center. You can search by the FOA type, so like those 4 types we were just talking about, the program announcements, announcements with review criteria. You can also search by activity code. So as Michelle was mentioning, we have lots of different NIH programs, and each one has a different activity code that goes with it. So if you were just interested in fellowship awards, for example, you could only select activity codes for fellowships, training, career development, research awards, all those types of things. You can also search by the due dates to see opportunities that are upcoming. And you can also search for notices here, so the notices of special interest that I was talking about as well.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Hey, Kristen, I had a question actually, but I don't know if since Michelle left, but it was on the other transaction programs. I was wondering what kinds of programs have been funded under that opportunity.
So far we've had just a few of them. The biggest one that you may have heard of is the All of Us Precision Medicine Initiative. That's the biggest one that's come out so far. There are a couple of others that are underway. And actually, now that we have the website up, we can search and see what kind of other transactions opportunities are available. So let's see if I can scroll down here. They're not listed in in the activity code search yet. Let's see if there are any.
Okay. Kristen, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So one from, I'll probably butcher names, so sorry in advance. Young Steries, which of the research grants are subject to cost accounting standards that require one to file disclosure statement, CAS DS1?
That's a very specific question.
It is.
I do not have the answer to that one off the
I'm
top
wondering
of
if
my
Michelle could
head,
probably-
but we might be able to circle back on that one a little bit
Okay,
later
we'll
on
circle
when we
back on
talk
that
compliance.
And then Sharon Ray, will other transaction opportunities being posted in grants.gov? Will the OTAs be in grants.gov?
That I'm not entirely sure of because I do know the process for submitting those is slightly different. So, but Michelle will definitely know the answer to that question.
Okay, so
but I-
fortunately, we're going to have to circle back on both of those questions.
She is our other transaction guru at the moment. But this is an example of a notice that's come out recently to alert the community that a new OT program is coming. And this one is, like I said, for that precision medicine initiative. So you can search for all that kind of stuff on the guide. So as I was discussing before, over here on the left, you can see all the different funding organizations, the activity codes, the type of research that you're interested in, if you know you have a clinical trial or not, the different types of funding opportunity announcements, as well as the release dates. And I'm going to pull up an example here for us. These are all notices. How do I clear my search? Okay. So I'm going to pull up this PAR here so we can just take a look at the pieces of the funding opportunity announcement. No, that's not an NIH one. Sorry. So here's a funding opportunity announcement for a program at NIH from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. So you can see here that this just has one IC that's participating in the PAR. The title, activity code is here. One of the important areas to look at when you're looking at a funding opportunity announcement is this related notices section. So once we've issued an announcement, if there are changes or anything that needs to be notified to anyone who's interested in applying, that will come out separately via a guide notice. And so you'll see links to any of those relevant guide notices here in the FOA. So it's important when you're looking at a FOA to click through to any related notices and make sure you capture any changes that were made to the funding opportunity announcement that might have been posted there. We also have an area here for companion funding opportunities. So if this is an area of science that's of interest to you, but this particular activity code doesn't quite hit what you're looking for, if there's a companion funding opportunity, it might be the same area of science, but a different activity code. So there might be multiple opportunities available in a specific area. There's also just some information about the purpose. And then you move down into this key dates section. So here we capture the application due date. If your application is targeted specifically towards AIDS-related research, sometimes those due dates are a little bit different. It also outlines the anticipated dates for peer review, council review, and if you're trying to plan ahead in your research institution, the earliest potential start date for the project themselves. You'll also see the expiration date of the funding opportunity announcement. So many of our announcements, these broader PARs and PAs, will be active for a couple of years with several due dates. Things like RFAs will typically have 1 or 2 specific due dates, and then they'll expire after those. And then as you move through the funding opportunity announcement, you'll see all of the requirements and details on what you need to have in your application, eligibility information, how to submit your application, and the review criteria that are going to be used during peer review. So as you're preparing the application, this is really a critical resource. You want to make sure that this is read extremely carefully so you can address all of the points in the announcement in your application. And so once you've found your announcement and your PI is ready to prepare their application and they're wondering, how do I actually fill in all the boxes and submit it to NIH? So our instructions are posted here on our How to Apply website. So NIH uses the SF424 application. And here you can find all of the details on how to submit your application and the specific requirements. And so up here in the prepare to apply, this is where you really want to go several months before you submit your application to make sure you have all of your registration in sam.gov, your DUNS number. Most of you guys are at established institutions, so this isn't really as relevant for you. But if you were at a newer institution, you would want to make sure that you had all of that information. You want to have all the relevant folks registered in ERA and make sure that everyone's information is up to date. And then you actually want to prepare your application. So here we have our instructions, and NIH makes it fairly easy. We have our general instructions document, which gives you all of the instructions for any type of application you might be preparing. But we also have filtered application instructions, so if you're working on a training program, you can look at instructions that are specific to training. So we try to make it as easy as possible. All right. So you're working on your application, you looked at your funding opportunity announcement, you know the due date, and you're going to submit early so that you can make sure you have no errors. It's really critical to look at the application due date. And applications are due by 5 p.m. your local time on the due date that's listed in the funding opportunity announcement. We do have a late application policy, but the reasons that you're able to submit late are very limited, so you really do have to submit on time. Many of our activity codes use what's called a standard due date. So we have 3 cycles throughout the year for our council review, and to allow us to kind of spread out the receipt of applications throughout the year, the different activity codes have different due dates spread out throughout the year as well. And you can see those on our grants website here. But again, always check the FOA. And then in terms of actually submitting your application, so for most of you guys, your institution will probably dictate how you're going to submit the NIH applications, but I am going to give a little bit background on some of the different options that are available. So we have ASSIST, which is an NIH system. We have system-to-system solutions, which many of the universities and bigger institutions use, which are actually managed at the applicant institution. And then there's the grants.gov workspace. So just to give a little bit of background on each option, ASSIST is managed by NIH, so it's our own NIH system. It allows multiple users to have access to your application and your profiles, and it leverages the ERA Commons information that I was talking about earlier. So ASSIST is really great because it actually pulls information directly from the profile into the application so that you don't have to enter that information manually yourself. It also allows you to do all of your validations before actually hitting submit, so you can see any potential errors that you need to fix before your application is finalized. And you can preview the application in the format that the agency will actually see it to make sure that it looks exactly how you want it for peer review.
Chris,
Yes.
we have a question
Okay.
on the FOAs.
Okay.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, that's
but I
fine.
didn't want to get too far
Sure.
ahead. From Roy Pennings, are FOAs generally require single entity or single PI or collaborative, meaning multi-research entity applications? Or where would I find whether it is one or the other?
So FOAs will cover all those different things. Some projects will specify that it needs to be a collaborative effort. They will specify if multiple PDPIs are allowed. All of that would be in the eligibility information and the program information in the funding opportunity announcement.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Sure. So to hop back into talking about submitting an application, so ASSIST, as I said, you can check everything before you submit things, and you can track your application status in a single system. So since ASSIST is an NIH system, even after you submit, you can continue to track it instead of having to go separately to ERA Commons. And you also have the ability to copy application data from one opportunity to another or to a different package, a different application package for that same funding opportunity. So it gives you that flexibility. The grants.gov workspace is a system that's managed by grants.gov, so it's separate from NIH. It does require some additional user registrations, and it does not allow you to pull from ERA Commons in the same way that ASSIST would. You're still able to do pre-submission validations and to preview in the agency format, but you're not able to track in ERA after you've submitted via the grants.gov workspace. You'd have to separately go to ERA Commons to track your information. And the one thing that's critical about grants.gov workspace, if you work in multi-project applications, you cannot submit them that way. So those need to come in through ASSIST or your system-to-system workflow. And then lastly, just a little bit of detail about system to system, since they do vary from institution to institution. These are managed by the applicant institution or service provider, and typically they're developed to integrate with your internal university or organization systems. So it allows you to pull data from those types of systems to make them more integrated. Okay, so you've done a great job. You found your funding opportunity announcement. You followed all of the instructions, and you've now submitted it to NIH. So let's talk about what happens next. It's the peer review process. So everything comes into NIH through our Center for Scientific Review, which is the gateway for all NIH grant applications, and it's where most of the reviews for scientific merit happen. CSR conducts the peer review for about 75% of applications. So that huge 70-something thousand number that we saw at the beginning, the majority of those are being done at CSR. And then the smaller portion with the more specific science and information, those reviews are done at the institute or center that's funding the awards. So all grant applications first come into what's called our Division of Receipt and Referral. And at that point, a preliminary administrative review is done. They check your application to make sure it's complete, to make sure that it has all of the things that were requested in the funding opportunity announcement. And then they determine the area of research that's covered to assign it to the appropriate IC. So if it came into, for example, one of those parent announcements with all of the ICs, they're going to find out which IC it needs to go to and make sure it goes to a study section for that IC. And as part of this process, they assign the NIH grant number. So I know when I started working with NIH grants, I always had to look back at this information because I could never remember the pieces of the NIH grant number. So I'm going to touch on those really quickly before we move forward. So the first part of the NIH grant number is the application type. So for new applications, that's going to be a 1. For example, a non-competing continuation once an award has been made would have a 5 at the beginning. If you're transferring from one institution to another, it would have a 7. And so you can find all of those various application types on our OER website. There's a link in the slide for you. The next piece of the number is the activity code. So this identifies the program that you're being funded under. This example, it's an R01 research grant, but you might also see things like a K award for career development, training, any of the different types of activities that would be indicated here. The next piece is the institute or center that's funding the award. So every IC has a 2-letter acronym. Takes a little while to get the hang of all of them, but you can see the full list in our glossary on the OER website. And in this example, CA is the National Cancer Institute. Every grant gets a 5-digit number. That's pretty straightforward. And then that's followed by the year of support. So since this example is a new award, it's a 1 at the beginning, and each year that number will just tick up. The suffixes at the end indicate whether it was an amended. The A is for an amended application. So if you submitted an application, it wasn't funded, but you were able to make some changes and resubmit, that would get an A at the end. And then S would indicate a supplement award. All right. So you've got your number, it's been assigned, we're ready for peer review. So peer review is the opportunity for NIH to maximize competition, to assess the scientific merit of all of our applications, rank them in order, and fund the best science. And so this is a 2-step review process. First, it starts with peer review, and then there's review by the advisory councils or boards. So initial review, like we said, can occur at CSR or at the IC that's going to fund the award. And in these discussions, these first discussions, they just talk about the major strengths and weaknesses, and they're using those review criteria that were provided in the funding opportunity announcement. So it's critical to target your application towards those criteria because that's exactly what they're going to use when they go to review your application. So each application has primary reviewers who everybody gets everything ahead of time, review it, and they score it, and then they come to the meeting to discuss. And reviewers score all the applications for which they're present and don't have a conflict of interest. So an example of a conflict of interest in peer review would be if I'm in a review section and someone else from my department has submitted an application that's been assigned to my study section, I can't review that application. So I would not score that application. I would leave the room during that discussion. So all the final scores are recorded. Applications that come in and in the preliminary review ahead of the meeting scored toward the bottom half, those regularly aren't discussed at the meeting. They will still get a summary statement with the critique, but it'll be indicated that it was not discussed. So what do the scores actually look like? It can be a little bit confusing if you're new to the process. Individual reviewers assign a score using a scale of 1 to 9. And in this case, 1 is the best, and 9 is the worst. So a lower score is actually better on an NIH grant application. And how they figure out the total overall score is they take the average from all of the eligible reviewers, and then they multiply it by 10. So the final score you see on your summary statement will range from 10 to 90, reported in whole numbers. And in addition to actually giving you that hard, raw score, they often also percentile rank them. So you'll see a percentile on your summary statement as well. So it's a relative rank in terms of how you did in comparison to the other applications in that study section. So for example, if your percentile ranking was 5th percentile, that would mean you did better than 95% of the other applications in your study section. So again, a lower number is better. Okay, and so what's going to be on the summary statement? The summary statement goes directly to the principal investigator and gives an overall resume and summary of the review discussion if it was scored. You'll get the written critiques from each of your primary reviewers, and then you'll also get your overall primary score, and if it was percentile ranked, that will be there as well. And it's important to keep in mind as you're reviewing this, the summary statement isn't meant to be a point-by-point critique of your application. It's meant to give you general feedback on things that could be improved or things that were good about the application. So it's not meant to be completely extensive or a teaching tool to make sure that the application is better the next time. It's more of a summary. I'm just going to pull up an example so that you can see what a summary statement looks like. So you'll see here at the beginning, there's some information about the PI, their applicant organization, and where the application was reviewed. And here you'll see the title, and then right here is the score. I guess I can't highlight. So this application did extremely well. I don't know. Go back. It got a score of 15, and it was in the 1st percentile, so it did better than 99% of the other applications. As you move down, it has some budget information from the application. You'll see a summary of the discussion. And then it moves into the individual critiques for each reviewer. So we'll give you their score, and then they identify the strengths and weaknesses for each of those review criteria that were outlined in the funding opportunity announcement. So that's the summary statement. All right. So once the peer review has been finished, the IC takes all of those percentile scores, they rank the applications, and they prepare a list that goes to the council for review. So each NIH IC has an advisory council or board, which is composed of scientists from the extramural research community and representatives from the public. These folks are appointed by the HHS director, or in the case of the National Cancer Institute, they're actually appointed by the President of the United States. And their main role is to provide that second level of peer review to make funding recommendations to the IC directors. And so only applications that have received both a favorable peer review as well as concurrence from the council can be funded. And so once that final fundable list is prepared, most of the ICs have what's called a funding strategy, and they post these online. So essentially, once they know their budget for the year, their funding priorities, their scientific goals, they'll set a line and essentially say, we're going to fund as much as we can up to the 8th percentile, for example. And so if you're interested in seeing that information, the ICs do post it online each fiscal year. This year they got posted a lot earlier because we actually got our budget on time. But you'll typically see them after the final budget is issued and the IC has set their strategy for the year. And there's a link here on the slide that you can use. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Dee, who's going to talk a little bit about pre-award, actually getting your award, and what you're going to do with it.
We're going to talk a lot about all that. Just a little. I can do this without falling off the stage.
No, we don't want that.
But you know, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen to me. That's how it usually happens. All right, and so we have this titled pre-award process, but it's really the award process. There's a lot that happens prior to the NOGA coming out, but then it's awarded, and then we have post-award, but this is really the award process. So during this award process and prior to us issuing the notice of award, whether it's mostly with the competing or the recompeting, the type 2s, we follow
this all is following peer review. It's ready for us to figure out what, if any terms, that kind of thing needs to go on. We'll ask for, you should get a request from a grants management specialist that will ask for just-in-time, other support, IRB or OLAW approvals. Sometimes we might ask for F&A rate agreements just to make sure that we have the most up-to-date. We engage in negotiations that if there is any perceived overlap in the science or in overlap on efforts, we may need to negotiate that type of stuff. Budgets, sometimes there may be something that the IRG during peer review marked as saying that they didn't feel like it was really needed, so it may need to be reduced. Or our program staff may identify costs that may need to be reduced. And then again, the facilities and administrative costs. Non-competing awards are processed, they're pretty streamlined with the RPPRs, and we'll talk more about that shortly. So what all does just-in-time really consist of? It can consist of really anything that the grants management or the program officers really deem that they need to have further information on. But the more standard stuff that you'll see is other support. And like I said, the IACUC approvals, the IRB approvals, all just-in-time information should be up to date. You know, other support comes in. You may get grants in constantly. One of your PIs is a highly fundable, PI. He may get other grants that come in. Well, that other support should be fully up to date within 120 days of this award. And it has to be, the just-in-time, when it is submitted to us, has to be signed off on by your signing official. That's the only way we're going to actually accept it. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more on the other support. This should include any and all, and I'm going to say it again, any and all financial resources, whether it is federal, non-federal, commercial, organizational, direct support of an individual's research endeavors. It must include everything.
Yeah, all research.
All research, right. The IC scientific program and the grants management staff, we review this, we analyze it. Grants management will look at the effort levels, make sure that there's not any overlap with effort. Scientific officials will make sure that there's not any scientific overlap. We're looking to see that there's sufficient level of effort for the particular grant that we're going to fund, that it can be actually accomplished with that. I mean, if you've got a clinical trial and the PI is only proposing 5% effort, we're going to look at it and go, we might need to rethink this because there's a whole lot more effort. That's an extreme example. There may be other research grants that 15, 20, 25%, that's where we rely on our program officers to really help us determine if there is enough of a level of effort to conduct the study. And like I said, we look for any scientific budgetary commitment overlap, if that has to be renegotiated down. All financial resources, domestic or foreign, directly supporting the individual research endeavors have to be reported. And only funds necessary to the approved projects are included in the award. So again, if IRG has reduced it or if program officers feel that there needs to be a reduction, that they may feel like the funds aren't really needed for the project. We take that into consideration and make decisions.
Um,
Negotiations, Negotiations are with you, with your AOR, with the program official, with the Chief Grants Management Officer if needed. It involves communication between any and all parties that need to be involved. And again, it can involve adjustments such as IRG recommendations, the budget programmatic modifications, the determination of the F&A rate. You know, have you gotten a new one within the last 60 days and we haven't gotten notification of it? We also negotiate the date, the start date. There's a lot of times when, especially a type 1 or a type 2 application comes into us, that it may go to our council in May, but you set a start date of April. Well, we can't fund it until it goes to council. So we may come back and say, are you okay with a start date of June 1 or a start date of July 1? And so there may be negotiations on that start date. Non-competing awards, the RPPR reviews. They're pretty streamlined. We expect to see what kind of progress has been made. We expect to see if there's been any budget changes, any major significant effort level changes. Some of the changes may indicate change in scope. If you have a multiple PI and PI situation and one of the PIs leaves, then that may be a change in the leadership plan. You have to have in this RPPR review, one of the things that will hold up an award is if all the publications are not compliant. So with public access, that will hold it up. Public access is a law. We'll talk about it a little bit further in detail later, but that can be a holdup on the award. Foreign involvement, if anything has changed with any existing foreign involvement, or if there is new foreign involvement, that may hold up an award. All invention reporting as the inventions are done, or as they need to be reported as soon as possible. And if there were any restrictions on the previous year and it still hasn't been released, we will need an update and a checkup on that. So we need to figure out if we have to continue the restrictions. Sometimes that's delayed onset with human subjects. You may see a restriction on the award the first year because the IRB approval hasn't been done yet because the human subjects are really not going to start until like year 2 or year 3. That's delayed onset. So that's just some of the examples. Stop me if you have any questions.
Is my microphone on? I don't want to interrupt you, but we do have a couple of questions.
Good.
So first, I think this one came in earlier, and we were waiting for Michelle to come back to answer it for us. But will other transaction opportunities be posted in grants.gov?
So that's a very good question. Other transaction authorities are typically not posted in grants.gov. They're typically posted on the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. So we talked a little bit about the non-traditional aspect of it. All of the grants and cooperative agreements are required to be posted in grants.gov, but not so with the other transaction awards or applications. We had kind of talked a little bit about the fact that some of the institutes and centers stick closely to how we do things with the grants. They try to mimic that for the other transactions, but there's not a requirement for them to be in grants.gov. There may be, but I encourage you all to look at the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and that will give you all of the details about where you can submit and how you can submit for those other transactions.
Great. And then, So we got a question about peer review, which asked if not discussed means the application is declined. So as I was explaining, not discussed is typically the awards that have scored in the bottom half. So while it doesn't automatically mean that your application is not going to be funded, you typically wouldn't expect to see an application receive funding if it was not discussed during peer review. Oh, and the first question that we got, which of the research grants are subject to cost accounting standards that require one to file a disclosure statement, CASB DS1?
So CASB DS1 is applicable to contracts. CASB DS2 is applicable to grants and cooperative agreements. And all educational institutions must file that.
Great. And then the last question, which we just got, is whether there's an official NIH policy on escalation in multi-year budgets for things like salary, travel, etc.
Yeah, that's a question we get often. It's very interesting, whether it's incrementally funded or whether it's multi-year funded. And I'm going to go on record with this. So what I often tell our applicants or the recipients is that if you don't ask for the funding, you won't get it. Now, does NIH have a standard policy about escalation? No. We do not offer escalation. We've moved into that flat realm. There was a time back in the day where we would have that 3%, 4% escalation, and it was it was consistent, and we offered that. Those were the good old days. Now we're in the good old days, but not necessarily offering that standard policy of escalation. But if you put the escalation, if you build the escalation into your application, and there's an opportunity to obtain additional funding, the institute and center will either provide the funds because you asked for it or cut it. I'd rather you ask for it and get it cut rather than not ask for it and have to come in for an administrative supplement. You need to ask for what you need that supports the science. And that's my standard answer. But no, we do not have a standard policy for escalation. We don't offer a standing policy for escalation, but we do encourage you to ask for what you need in order to support the science.
Okay, so we'll turn it back over to you, Dee.
Okay.
Did that make sense to everyone? Okay. You have a question?
Is that a follow-up? Oh, we have a question for Dee. Do we have the microphone? Up in the front here.
Thanks. Hi, Dee. Earlier you were talking about other support, and I noticed one of the definitions was organizational awards. I was wondering if you could expand on that, because I understand that gifts and prizes, that those things aren't considered other support. But when you say organizational awards, like what other things under that are or not other support?
So now you're making me draw on old information in my head that comes back from my days when I was sitting at the grantee institutions as a research administrator. So where I came from, one of the institutions I worked for would do organizational awards based on research fields. In other words, it may be a new investigator or it may be a new PI that has come to the university, and because of what they're wanting to do, but they haven't been able to receive grant funding from like one of the funding agencies or what have you, they may give them not endowment, not gift, but it is an actual institutional award from the organization. It does not happen often. It does not happen everywhere. It's not discretionary funds. It's not, it is termed an award from the organization. Do you guys have any other examples?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's
Okay.
typically one from the institution, from your institution.
Yes. Anything that's research-related award money.
Supporting that individual's
Support,
research
yes.
endeavors, all
all endeavors.
I want to back up, though, just a little bit, since this is a fundamentals, just to talk about the just-in-time. And you guys probably know this, but I think it's worth repeating. So when we talk about just-in-time, this is another opportunity for NIH to reduce administrative burden. So you submit all of this. What we're trying to do is not require grantees or recipients to submit information that's not needed until the award is made. And you all will probably see a lot more of that even in what you're going to be submitting on applications. Because NIH is very interested in only collecting information at the time of application that's required to get you through peer review. If it's not something that's required and is likely to change by the time the award is made, why have the applicant submit that information when the application comes in and then have to resubmit that information just in time before the award is made? So we are really looking for ways to expand on reducing administrative burden by only requiring things that are really, really needed at the time that the application is submitted and so that can get the application through peer review. Anything that can be collected before that award is made is something that we call just in time. So I just wanted to make that pitch to you all, just to let you know that we still continue to look for ways to reduce administrative burden on the applicants and only collect information that's truly needed at the time of the award.
I'm not sure if I missed this, but during the time of reviewing an application comes in and you guys, I guess, determine which center it goes to, do you guys ever, I guess, make a decision just based off of what you're seeing, but if a PI has a different center that they intended it to go, is there a process to maybe switch it over to that center, or how does that work?
So yeah, that review is done at CSR. They assess the IC that you've submitted to, and if it falls within another IC that's on that funding opportunity announcement, they will direct it to the appropriate institute to review it. However, if you've submitted something to an RFA that's only for the National Cancer Institute and your application is about, heart disease, they're not going to reassign it to another FOA. That's going to come back as being non-responsive to the opportunity that it was applied for.
Okay, so but if it's for multiple, but a PI intended it to go to one, but it went to another one, is there a possibility that the PI can
There
ask for
is
it?
an assignment, a change in assignment request process. I don't have all the specifics right now, but that information is available on the CSR website. They do have detailed instructions for that.
And hopefully, if you feel free to email either Kristen or myself, so that if you have that question, we can make sure you get that
We can
information.
send it to you directly.
Yeah.
We have one more question. Michelle, when you were talking about building in the escalation, do you build it in yearly, or do you build it in and then spread it out over all the years?
Annual.
Okay.
If you're gonna,
Well, some of mine have been built in and spread out throughout the 3 to 5 years. And then we put it in. We do put it in each time, but some of them have been built in the 3 to 5 years.
So, I mean, again, the escalation point is not necessarily about the escalation, but it's about the need. And so however you build that in, if there is a need and you build it in however you build it in, then once it's reviewed and approved for funding, the institute or center will review it and determine whether or not the budget is matching the need, the science.
One that's better than the other, or
No, because if we go down that road, then it's really about just getting an escalation, and there may not be a need. So I don't want to paint that picture either.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Oh, we got one more online. When a just-in-time notice is posted in ERA Commons, is a notice also sent to the principal investigator?
That must be the automatic.
Yeah, so there is an automatic notification that goes out when you're being requested just in time,
But the question is
whether it goes to the PI.
It should, yes.
It does, yeah.
It goes to the PI, and it also goes to, we see it.
Yeah,
We
to
see
the
it at the
institution
ICs.
official and then also the PI.
Now, that being said, that request can come out early. And before this 120 days that we're just trying to negotiate the award, and it may be 120 days after that request actually went out. And if that's the case, and in most cases, if we have it on a fundable score list or on what we call a pay list, we will ask for the just-in-time in order to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information. Does that answer that? Okay. So we will go on. Notice of award. What is it? How do we do it? Once a competing award or the RPPR is reviewed and approved, the GMO or the GMS, which is the agent of the GMO, can issue a notice of award. That notice of award is the legally binding document. And I will stress that again, legally binding, because it notifies you, the recipient, when the funds have been obligated, and you can now start the research, you can start spending the money, you can start drawing it down, but once you draw down money, you have officially accepted that award. So all terms and conditions at that point are set, okay? It has several different sections to it. Within those sections, you have, like at the very beginning of it, you'll see the budget period date, you'll see the project dates, whether it's going for 1 year or 5 years. And those are all shown, the subsequent date budgets will be shown as an obligation at the very end of the award, but at the beginning you just have the dates. You have 2 different sections for terms of award. You have the section 2, which is the NIH standard terms. Those terms are on every award. Okay, that includes things such as expanded authorities, which we will talk about here in a little bit. It talks about which part of expanded authorities is whether you have the ability to carry forward funds automatically or not. Some mechanisms you can, some mechanisms you can't. Some of them you'll have, expanded authorities generally is always you get your first no-cost extension. If it's a very complex project and it has been negotiated that the no-cost extension will have to be asked for, then that can be in there, but that's going to be more of your your 4th section. So the standard terms of the NIH standard terms are section 2. Section 4 are your more specific terms. And I would tell you to really pay attention to that section, because that is the message from the IC that says this is what we expect. Case in point, cooperative agreements. My IC, NIDDK, has their own set of approved cooperative agreement terms and conditions. Those terms and conditions are usually included in the FOA, but it's also included as that last section, as that section 4 in the notice of award in order for it to be in the legal document. Okay, so, or if there's any specific restrictions, such as the human subject or the OLAW restrictions. So that's where your specific, I call it our message to you as the IC, this is what we need, this is what we expect, please be aware of it. They are not policy reminders, they are terms. Okay? I instruct my specialists all the time, don't put it in as a policy reminder. We don't have that. We have specific terms. Okay? Also, at the end of it, you have the very important information for point of contacts. If you have a question for the budget end of it, the financial end of it, please call the grants management specialist. If you have If your PI needs some guidance on the scientific, the research methods, the aims, have him call the program officer. I will tell you, we talk to our program officers turn around and talk to us, so if they get a call, we know about it. If we get a call, they know about it. And then, like I said, it's officially accepted once the recipient draws down funds on the award. Any questions on the notice of award? Nope. Okay. The award's been made. Yay! Now what do we do? A lot. So we'll go through the roles and responsibilities. The recipient institution, the AOR, the Authorized Organization Representative, has a very big responsibility. They have to ensure that the compliance with federal regulations, policies, and procedures are followed. They have to monitor any proper conduct of the research, make sure that, oh, what was that?
I hope it wasn't me.
No, sorry. It scared me. And they also have the responsibility of the fiscal management, whether it is day-to-day operations, whether it is letter of credit or the payment management system, whether it's reporting, that all that is the fiscal management of the project.
So,
have a good question
yep,
that
I'm
came
just
in.
going to jump in with a quick question. Why does the NOA show the subrecipients sometimes?
Okay, so I can tell you why we show it, and I think it's pretty much the overarching reason. But subrecipients usually are given a portion of the funds, and we need to know where the performance sites of the research is going to happen. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I'm going to expand on that just a bit, just because I want to make sure that it's very clear that even under a multi-PI scenario, right?
Yeah.
We only have a contact institution. We make the award to a single institution, and we do not have a relationship with the subrecipients. The relationship with the subrecipient lies with the primary or the parent institution. So while some ICs might include the subrecipient, right, on their award, it's for informational purposes only. But the relationship that we have is directly with the prime institution. I've seen a lot of that in applications where the application includes the subrecipient. I'm not sure where that is done on the notice of award, though, unless it's done in the
Usually,
terms of
Usually
conditions.
DIC,
Okay.
Section 4.
Okay. So, yeah, NIDDK, we'll be looking at their awards when we get back.
Oh, come on. I don't think we're the only ones that do that.
And
Just kidding.
Again, a lot of times it is informational, and it is also to just align with you guys so that we know and you know what awards or what funding we're giving to the performance sites that you have said are going to be helping you in this research. So it's good for them and us.
so one more question. Is there a timeline for accepting and drawing down funds? So I guess I can talk to that a little bit. So you should be drawing down funds and payment management as you're ready to make your expenditures. So the expectation is that you're drawing down funds you have the obligations ready to go, you're ready to spend the money. So the expectation is you draw it down, and the expectation is usually about 3 days, you've spent that money and the cash is drawn out. You're not meant to just be drawing down your full award amount and spending it here and there as you proceed with the award. You need to have your obligations ready to go when the funds are drawn.
Yeah, and let me speak to that 3 days. Because when I was out on the grantee side, I actually did all of our FCTR payment management reporting. And I also directed with one person, another person that actually drew down the funds. you calculate that drawdown so that you know you're going to have that money spent within 3 days after drawing it down. Otherwise, the federal government is due interest on those funds. So you must know that is, you have to have that done. So it's not like, yeah, you can't draw down, we gave you $1 million and okay, I'm gonna just draw that down now. No, because if you spend that in 3 days and this is a 12-month award, I'm gonna be coming and asking questions while you did it. Okay? So it's drawn down as you spend it. And then every quarter, you report those expenditures.
And we also have a follow-up question about the subrecipients. So does this mean that the prime recipient must make individual legal agreements with each subrecipient?
Yes.
If so, are you required to see their agreements at NIH?
No. So answer to the first part, yes, there should be a legal subcontract between the prime institution and the subcontractor. However, NIH is going to take that arm's length relationship. It's your grant. We rely on you to administer it. We rely on you to administer and monitor your subrecipients. If there is a problem with one and it's going to change something in the grant, then sure, you come and you ask us about that change, and we actually approve, the change in the subcontract if need be, from one entity to another, because we're going to want to make that note that it has changed. But we don't talk to the subrecipients, nor do we want to. That is all you. Okay, does that make sense? Anything else? That's it? Okay. Where was I? So, the recipient institution, we're in the roles and responsibilities, right? Okay, recipient institution, the awards are made to the recipient institution, not the PI, not an individual. It is to the grantee institution. Our relationship is with the institution. Okay, I can't tell you how many times we get calls from the PI. My grant, no, not your grant. Your research, yes, not your grant. The PI is responsible for the scientific and the technical aspects of the grant, the day-to-day management of the research, the project, but we expect the sponsored programs or the Office of Research or whatever you call it to make sure that you manage this award correctly. And like I said, the final person that's really responsible for all this would be somebody that is deemed the authorized organizational representative. Any questions? All right. So, and we realize there's a whole lot more staff that is involved at the recipient institution. Know that we know that. I actually grill my grant specialists into knowing and to searching and to making sure that when they speak to the institution that they're speaking to the correct person, because otherwise you're not going to get the right answers. NIH staff. Program official, responsible for the programmatic, scientific, and or technical aspects of the grant. So they are like your PI, but they're at NIH. So they're talking to the PI, they're talking about the science, they review, and because of that, when we have an RPPR come in, or 9 times out of 10, even with the new grants or a competing grant with a new segment coming forward, that program officer already has spoken to the PI. A lot of times they'll call them and ask them questions about whether it's a good initiative or not. So the program officials really already know what to expect and what's coming, but they will review not only the pre-award information that we get in, but they also review all post-award requests. They review the RPPR for the scientific progress. They review prior approvals. They work with grants management, and they talk to us about the prior approvals. They do a lot. They are, in the case of a cooperative agreement, they're heavily involved with your PI and with the steering committees, with the DSMB, with the data safety monitoring boards. They will also, depending on the project, I have seen them and have heard them negotiate with the PIs for the INDs and IDEs at FDA. They help with protocol development. So program official is probably one of the most important roles at NIH because they really see the whole picture. They see the whole project. The Chief Grants Management Officer is really more administrative. They are responsible for the grants management staff at each institute. My chief is Bob Pike, one of the best GMOs ever. Anyway, I'll give him a plug. He is responsible for working with the upper management of the IC on the funding strategies that we're going to go forward with each year. He provides leadership to not only our office, but he also provides leadership to our division, which is the Division of Extramural Affairs. He works with the director, the IC director directly, the deputy director of the IC. So he is on more of a higher level, strategic administrative role. Therefore, there's no way he has enough time to release all 6,500 grant transactions that we do a year. So he delegates a lot of his release authority to specialists, team leads, myself. It's kind of a split division. He does more the higher stuff, and the staff below him do a lot of the nuts and bolts of everything. And so therefore he appoints and provides oversight to the specialists that have GMO authority. And each NIH component has a chief GMO, so there's 24 of them. So someone like me that's a deputy that would love to be a chief, it's kind of hard to get a job because it's very competitive. There's only 24 of them, and they don't tend to leave very often. So then you have grants management officer, or this would be a senior grants management specialist that has, oh, no, we did this is a different slide, sorry. It's still the chief GMO, or somebody with his authority is the only NIH official that is authorized to obligate the NIH to expenditures of funds. So only somebody that has that authority, that can release an award, that obligates the funds, has that GMO authority. The specialists. There is no way I or Bob could do our job without the staff that we have. They do the nuts and bolts of the job every day. They are the ones that do the budget analysis. They do a lot of the award analysis with the program officials. If they have problems, and just to say, I sometimes have a line at my door. Without them, we can't do what we do. They assure compliance with the laws, with the NIH and the HHS policies and procedures. They analyze the grant applications in great detail. They provide technical assistance or they interpret NIH policy for you, for me, for the IC director, for program, whoever comes and asks them at their door, what does this mean? They are the ones there that are being inundated with the questions. They award the grant funds if they have that authority to do so. We do have it, like at my institute, we have 28 specialists. We have 5 that do not have the authority as of yet to award grants. So they rely on somebody else to review their work, and then it gets awarded, it gets signed off on by somebody else. And they review and respond to any and all of your prior approval requests, your requests, your emails, inquiries, questions. You know, you bug them, they bug me, I bug Bob. It's a nice circle.
So I'm just going to jump in real quick. It's time for our break.
Okay.
So you mentioned in the
I'm
roles
going
and
to get to know you well.
Yes. You mentioned earlier in the roles and responsibilities that the NIH is looking to communicate only with the authorized institutional official.
Not always only.
Sorry.
But that's our official, that's where we consider the official communication coming from.
Yes. So we are trying as an institution to make sure that information funnels through the appropriate, the official communication funnels through the appropriate institutional official as well. Curious if NIH is doing anything to, either communicate or train or manage situations where PIs are reaching out about their grant that they are looking to get financial or administrative,
So I know it is said and I know it is spoken about in our Grants Management University training. We have an actual training mechanism for new specialists and for senior specialists, but especially for the new, they go through like an orientation class. And I know that there is a statement made in there to make sure that if you're going to talk to a PI that you ask them first, have they spoken to their business office or their AOR or their research administrator? I really pound that into my staff because the first thing I look at if they bring a question to me, especially if it's an email and it's an email from the PI, my first question to them is, do you know if they have asked? Because you have institutional policies, and we will not go against your institutional policies. So as much as you can reiterate it and say it, and I can't say that it's perfect, but we do the best we can to make sure that we train folks to know that they need to ask that question first.
And just to add to Dee's response, at the OD central level, we have what we call executive committees with our program officials. They're the what we call the Division of Extramural Affairs directors that pretty much oversee both program, sometimes review functions, and grants management typically. And what we try to do there is to raise awareness to the fact that the institution is the recipient of the NIH award. We've put out reminders in the NIH guide for grants and contracts to say the recipient institution is our main focal communication. That's where the relationship lies. And we've had some instances under a specific violation where we are now updating policies to make sure that program officials know where the line is for their communication with the PDPI, and specifically with the grants management and the role of program staff in the entire process, because we want to make sure that those lines are not crossed often. We know that the PDPI needs to have some technical assistance and interactions with the program officials, but it needs to be limited to the scope by which the responsibilities are.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question was at the same time, do you have any suggestions on how to work with a PO that maybe is reaching out and giving giving, financial or administrative advice?
So yes, I figured that you were going in that direction. We're ESPN over here together. We are absolutely in the process of developing policies and compliance guidance that will measure and monitor the framework by which POs are reaching out and providing that additional assistance. And we are looking at modifying those roles and responsibilities to make sure that those lines are not crossed. At the same time, we want to make sure that we maintain that relationship between the PO and the PDPI, because there are times where there's that technical assistance and those discussions that need to take place. But there are lines of demarcation that cannot be crossed, and we're going to try to eradicate some of those.
Anything else? Nothing come up there?
We have a question about our PPRs, but I'll leave it till you talk about that.
Okay.
We can touch it there.
All right. All right, managing your awards. So, what do we expect you to do? A lot. Again, a lot. We expect you to manage your award. You need to have knowledge of the NIH grants policy statement, or at least know how to navigate it. I once upon a time had a specialist that had photo memory, and she started quoting stuff back to me one day, and I was like, oh, really, where is that? So you have to at least know where to navigate or how to navigate it. You need to understand what expanded authorities are, so that what authorities do you have without having to come to us. How to and what needs to be in a prior approval request. And then there are those aspects such as reporting requirements and financial conflict of interest.
Don't switch. I'm going to do a pop quiz.
Uh-oh. A pop quiz of them, not me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sure.
Let's see. Who should we pick? I like this guy up here, right here. Yes, you. What is Section 2 of the NIH Grants Policy Statement?
Section 2, that's about juggling and whether or not it's appropriate for any grant. I have no idea.
I like you. I was like,
You were trying to think of it.
Go
weren't
Pack.
you? Uh-huh.
go Pack. And those are our administrative requirements. All right. What's one expanded authority that could be used without requesting prior approval? Let's see. Who do we pick? We got a volunteer.
Would it be like a no-cost extension?
Which one? The first, second, or third?
I don't know that.
It is a no-cost extension,
Okay.
and it's your first one.
One. Okay.
Yep, very good. You, you knew that one. Okay, what would require prior approval?
I'm taking a stab in the dark here, but budget modifications?
Significant ones.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I stepped on your thunder.
The teacher, given the answers. Yes, significant. That's right. And name one reporting requirement.
Oh, come on, volunteer for this.
Look, she's putting her head down. I want to go right here.
What?
Yeah, the escalation question. You know one reporting requirement.
Okay, one reporting requirement, like after the awards.
After the award's
done.
made.
Okay, like.
Either after it's made or after it closes.
Okay, so some of the ones that I deal with have like they ask for updated like personnel. They ask for other support, updated other support. That's like who's on the project. They ask who's on the project, so that's your personnel, and then other support, of course, if it's been updated, because that's our yearly forms that come in that we have to report back.
Okay. Give me one for closeout.
Oh, Lord, I don't know closeout. We don't do that. I don't do that.
Okay.
This is another WAG, final report within 90 days.
Look. Yes, indeed. All right. Good.
Final financial report.
Final report, whatever it is,
Final
right?
report.
NIH is nicer than that, though. We give you 120 days. So.
Unless it's within the competing segment.
Well, yeah. But the final report, you get 120
The
days.
final report gets 120 days. You're right.
She's right.
You're right. And so
Good work.
some of those questions actually covered exactly what I'm going to be covering. So anyway, all right. So here is the be-all, end-all, the policy statement. When I was out there sitting in your chair, this was my Bible. This is the guidance for any and all of our grants. So it provides a one-stop shop for all policy requirements. It serves as the terms and conditions for all NIH grant awards. Part 1 is where you will find general information, definitions, glossary terms, roles and responsibilities. It's a lot of the administrative, call it garble. It's the administrative stuff. Part 2A is the terms and conditions. That is where you're going to find the general terms and conditions that are used on the awards. It's where expanded authorities resides. It's where the prior approval guidance resides. So 2A is your major section. Okay, we'll go there. 2B has a separate sections on specific terms. So 2A is more your general terms. 2B drills down onto more specific terms, such as the multiple PIs, the construction grants, the training grants, conference grants, consortium agreements, patient care costs, foreign institutions, a lot. I mean, you've got the list up here. Part 3 is more your points of contact and how, who to go to if you have a question, or, and even, isn't there some HHS?
So it's your
contact?
OIG hotline,
Yeah.
if you want to do some reporting there. We also give information on the payment management project support center so that you identify where you're going to draw down those funds. So we give a lot of information there. Yep.
Yeah. So who really does this? Who really puts this together? The main authors of it are in Michelle's office, in the Office of Policy and the Office of Compliance. But in order for them to do that, they rely on comments from NIH staff, from staff out there in grantee institutions, all over. I mean, anybody can make a comment to help. And then the target audience is, of course, you, but then we use it too as our Bible, as the grants administrators there at NIH.
And one of the things we do in that process, just to add to what Dee is saying in terms of that coordination piece, for opera, what you see in the NIH guide for grants and contracts throughout the year, because we try to update the policy statement annually. So when we put out policies in the guide, those are the policies that you will see swept into the policy statement at the end of that fiscal year for the next fiscal year. So it's not likely that you'll see a whole lot of differences by which we put it out during the year. You might see some additional policies that have come up as a result of the policy statement being updated. But much of our process is to get the information out to you guys as quickly and as often as possible in real time. And then what you'll find is it's swept into the policy statement, the grants policy statement at the end of the year, so that you have it right there and can refer back to it instead of looking at all of the notices. So that's pretty much the process.
And just to piggyback off that, I'll put in another plug for the NIH Guide Table of Contents listserv that I showed you when I pulled up the guide website. So in those weekly emails that they send out, the policy notices are all included, so you can get that summary as well.
Yeah, you can subscribe to it.
That's at the end. We actually point that kind of stuff out at the end. All right, expanded authorities. What is it? What does it do for you? It is NIH's commitment to you to try to reduce the administrative burden. There's certain expanded authorities that you have the right to. So what are those? The first one listed here is the first 12-month no-cost extension of a project. You've gone through 5 years. The research isn't quite done. The PI may have some additional data analysis he needs to do. They're still writing publications, that kind of activities going on. You, as the institution, can go in and do your first no-cost extension for 12 months, up to 12 months. If you don't think it's going to take 12 months, then don't do it for the full 12 months. But I will say this, if you don't do it for the 12 months, say you only do it for 6 months, and then after 6 months, oh, lo and behold, we now need more time, then it's a second no-cost extension, and you would have to come back to us and ask for it. That's a prior approval, okay? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, just to clarify, you stated don't ask for the 12 if you don't need it, but if you do need more, you'll have to come back for the second approval. What would be the con to requesting 12 months but only needing 4, 6, 9, or whatever? Would there be a con to asking for more time than necessary?
So I guess the question is, if you need less than 12, is that the question?
Right, to prevent us from asking for a second no-cost extension, could asking for 12, is there a con or is there something that would happen as a ramification for asking for too much time?
So there's not a con. However, within the regulations, 45 CFR Part 75, which is implemented in your grants policy statement, institutions typically can only ask for up to 12 months. And so that
in total?
No, not total.
Oh, okay.
For each year.
For the expanded authorities part.
So the first 12 months, there's a notification process. You don't need to ask for approval. Okay. So if the notification is just for 12 months, then it's 12 months. If it's more than 12 months, then typically you would have to come into the NIH to notify us of that.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything else? No? Nothing there?
Yeah, so we do have questions here.
We have a couple about prior approval if you want to do them now or when you talk about prior approval.
Well, this one is about the PMS system, which I think is a good one.
Okay, so the first question is, why does PMS only give us 90 days for the final draw, but NIH gives us 120 days for the final FFR?
So those are two different reports. The federal cash transaction portion of the FFR goes to the payment management system. And the payment management system uses that report to audit and account for the drawdowns, right? So you guys draw down and then you certify by submitting the report back to PMS. So that's their timeline. The FFR expenditure report at the closeout segment is 120 days now, because what we did was during the uniform regulation process, we fought, and I'm going to say my colleague Gene Feldman at NSF and I really fought really hard to try to tease the research community out of that 90-day window. Based on metrics that we received from our colleagues within FDP and COGR, it was very clear to us that those research institutions that have a lot of subcontracts and have typically, I think it was really based on the number of subcontracts, there was a lot of unliquidated obligations and a lot of reconciliations that were taking place under the expenditure portion. And we saw that within 90 days, folks were really being dinged on audits because you all were late submitting those reports. Not you all, but the recipients. And so when we added that additional time was an effort to give their research recipients more time to get those subcontracts cleared, get those things reconciled so that you could submit the reports timely and not have to worry about audit findings. So it was really an effort to do that. And like I said, the federal cash transaction report is a different report. It's not one that comes to the agency. It's one where you guys report back up to payment management and certify the amount of funding that you drew down on each of your documents. And I know you guys know that well. So that's the difference.
Okay, and so another question we got is about OLA assurance. So if the institution does not currently have one, do we need it before we apply or only if we receive the grant? So OLA assurance is required in order for an award to be made. So if you don't have your assurance at the time you submit your application and the application makes it through review and is being considered for funding, OLA will reach out to you at that time to ensure that you've established your assurance before the award is made. But it doesn't have to be completed in order to submit the actual application.
It's a just-in-time requirement. And typically, I think the grants management folks reach out to the institutions to obtain that final.
Well, and it depends on, are you talking about the IACUC approval or are you talking about the actual assurance?
Right. This question, I believe, was specifically about the assurance.
Okay. The assurance. Okay.
And then a question for you, Dee, about prior approval. So my institution just received their first NIH award, and we need to make some budgetary adjustments for the subaward. Do we need NIH approval for our subaward? The budget adjustments include reducing the amount to our sub by 20 to 30%.
So I guess my question back would be, with that 20 to 30% that they're going to reduce, are they going to actually put that back into their grant, which is going to now then be a significant rebudget? So it is a talking point. It is something that they need to request. And it's better to go ahead and do the work, put in the prior approval. If the grants management office comes back and says, we didn't really need to approve this, then they can tell them at that time. If they feel like it is an approval that's needed, then they can go ahead, they can analyze it, they can ask questions, they can do their clarifications, and they can get to the approval point or the not approval point. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So we're going to keep going on expanded authorities. Rebudgeting unrestricted funds between budget categories if an indication of a change in the change of scope of the project. So if not a change in scope. So you have the ability as the grantee institution, if it's not a significant rebudget, it is something that is needed to happen, and they are unrestricted funds. Because there are, like, patient care costs will be typically restricted funds. Depending on the grant, if there's a large piece of equipment that's been budgeted for, we may restrict those funds for only that purpose, that kind of thing. So if they are unrestricted funds and it's not a significant rebudget, you have the ability at your institution to approve that with your PI's request. Carryover of unexpended unrestricted funds from one budget to the next. That is if it is a grant that allows it. There are some mechanisms, such as your program project grants, your cooperative agreements, sorry. I didn't mean to say that. I don't know where it came from. The cooperative agreements, a lot of times the carry forwards are not automatic. They are not that you have to request those on an annual basis, but your R01, your typical research grant, most of those are allowable under SNAP to do the automatic carry forward. And each year in the payment management system, it will just automatically carry it forward for you. What if you want to transfer performance of work to a third party or change a third party? Well, if it's not an indication of a change in scope and it's not a third party that is a foreign organization, then you have that authority also. Now, I will say to this, if you're going to create a new subcontract on a grant that was awarded that didn't have one to start with, and it's going to be a significant rebudget of funds, then you may have to come to the Grants Management Office and ask us if you can do that. It's not really the question of whether you can add a subcontract as much as it is a question of whether you can do that significant rebudget. And if it is a significant rebudget, is it a change in scope? So it just leads from one question to another.
We had a question earlier. Sorry. We had a question earlier that one of our good friends here in the session provided us with the response to, because she had just undertaken a change in assignment, and we had. I'm not sure who asked the question. Oh, our colleague back there. You had asked the question about the change in assignment and how that's done. And we had told you that you could contact us, but we have someone that's going to be working with me at NIH very soon to assist us with that. So do you want to just read that response, Krista?
Sure. So this was a response that they got back about change in assignment requests. So if there are questions about the appropriateness of the assignment, the investigator should contact the scientific review officer. So those are the folks that coordinate the peer review for review assignment questions, or the Division of Receipt and Referral for the Institute or Center questions. If a change is requested, it's most efficient to email the request directly to the Division of Receipt and Referral, who will notify the investigator whether or not the change is possible. And so when the review location, institute, or timetable is changed, that information will then be updated in ERA Commons. So it's CSRDRR is the email at mail.nih.gov.
Raise your hand so we can just give you a quick shout out. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Yes, you have
that communication.
Thank you.
That said, the communication should come from the investigator. I'm just curious if that should go through the investigator or the authorized institutional official.
So this email says the investigator, but I'm going to go with it should be the authorized
Okay.
official, not the investigator directly. No? Okay, that seems.
Hold on.
The PI does need to do it, and then they will get a response back that it's been changed.
But they would definitely need to at least be looping in their research office, I would think.
Okay. So, prior approvals. That's the written approval by an authorized designated ICGMO evidencing and prior consent before a recipient undertakes certain activities or incurs specific costs. Need some explanation? That's the official definition of prior approval. NIH prior approvals are required for but not limited to second or third no-cost extensions. I hang my head that I have in my 30 years seen a fourth no-cost extension, but very rare. And it was basically a one-year project that ended up being approved. However, that should rarely happen. And I think, like I said, in my 30 years, it's only happened once. Change of PI. You know, we've had instances where we've had a PI be deceased, and the institutions had to come to us and ask us to change the PI and put somebody else in leadership. Or the PI has gone to a new institution. So if the primary institution is going to allow for the transfer, then we need, their relinquishment. Or if the PI goes to another institution and that institution's not going to let go of the grant, then they have to ask for a change in PI. So it can happen both ways. The addition of a foreign component. Anytime there is a foreign, any foreign involvement has to be approved. Undertaking activities disapproved or restricted as a term of award. Basic, I would say, rule of thumb is what has been peer-reviewed and approved is what we have put the grant award out for. So if there is, some activity that's going on with the grant that wasn't peer-reviewed and approved, then that's basically disapproved activity. It may not be disallowable. You can ask if you can take the research in a different direction or expand it in some way, and that can be allowed, but you need to be asking for it. You can't just assume that you can do that. It needs to be prior approved. What if you need additional NIH funds? Well, I would certainly hope that you would know that you have to ask for that. You can't just assume you're going to take it. And those are supplements, or they're administrative supplements, or maybe we reduced funds in the beginning and we need to restore some of the funds. Again, it's prior approval. Carryover of restricted funds, if required by the term of award. Again, if you have restricted funds within the award, that may have to be asked for, or in the case of cooperative agreements or the program project grants, you don't have automatic carry forward, so you're going to have to ask for that. And then change in scope, and I'm going to be expanding on change in scope. Did you want to add anything to that? Nope. Okay. So we'll go on to change in scope because it's a little bit more involved. What indicates a change in scope? Well, a large significant rebudget of funds can indicate a change in scope because you're redirecting funds that may indicate you're redirecting the research. Change in aims. Say the grant came in and you have 3 specific aims. One of those aims showed a right turn in the research, and so you need to tweak that aim a little bit. Well, that aim, changing it may require a prior approval for that. Did the grant come in using animals and then we find out there's some human tissue or human use subjects, being done? Well, I hope not. But if that happens, that's a prior approval, or that's a change in scope. If you propose to do it on animals and yet you're doing it on human subjects, then that's definitely a change in scope, or vice versa, if you go from humans to animals. Or if it didn't come in with any, and lo and behold, you decide to use it, that's change in scope.
The other, and to add to that, another one would be a change in the animal model.
Yeah.
You're going to use a rat, and now you decide you're going to use another animal. That is a change in scope indicator.
Correct. A significant change in key personnel. Again, this could be going from multiple PI to single PI, or your co-PI got mad at the PI and decided, I don't want to work with him anymore. So the PI wants to name a new co-PI. Well, that co-PI, if their research is not really what is supposed to be being done with this research, then is that a change in scope? Sorry, excuse me. Significant, Yes, please, thank you. Getting a dry throat. Thank you.
Do you like to talk? I'm surprised you're getting a dry throat.
I do like to talk. But you know what? When everybody else had the chance to go and get a refreshment, I didn't. So, All right, now I'm getting a little pity. That's rare. Significant rebudgeting. Why would that be a change in scope? Again, like I said, if you're totally deviating funds from one category to another, or you're going to say you're taking it from equipment and we planned on you buying a big piece of equipment that would facilitate the grant, and yet you want to add 4 personnel to it. I mean, you're redirecting a significant amount of funds, and it's kind of, you got to sit back and look at it and go, why are the 4 people needed versus the piece of equipment? What can they do that the equipment can't? And does it make up a change of scope? And then an application of a new technology. We have a grant that was awarded 4 years ago, and we're going to go into the last year, and there's been some sort of, cutting edge, breaking technology, but it's going to cause either a redirection of funds or a redirection of the actual research. Then again, you're talking, it could be a change in scope. Okay.
So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but we have a question on what is a significant change in the budget that calls for resubmission of the budget?
Okay, so, and this is a general rule for any significant change is 25%. That's kind of our threshold to indicate that there's been a significant change. It's not a hard and fast threshold. It's not in policy that 25% actually says significant, but is it?
Yes.
Oh, is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's an indicator of a change in scope.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I need to go find that. But it is that's the threshold that we use as a general rule of thumb. So that would be what makes it a significant rebudget, significant change of any kind. And that, of particular note, significant reduction in level of effort of key personnel requires NIH prior approval. Again, it uses that 25% or more reduction. The PI is always key personnel. Other key personnel, so on the grant application, you may have a long list of key personnel, but yet on the notice of award, they may or may not actually be listed in the award. A lot of that is negotiation between the PI and the PO at our institution. And the PO will actually say to us, yes, these people, to them, are key personnel. However, I do not want them listed on the notice of award, so therefore they will not be on the notice of award. If they are not on the notice of award, then if they change their effort, it's not a significant change to us, therefore it wouldn't be a prior approval. Yes, ma'am. I have a question over here.
So I've had a few where on the award, of course, the PI is listed, and then hourly undergrads or grads are listed. And I've had a PI change where he no longer wants that, he wants a postdoc. Would that require prior approval because now we're changing from grad students to postdoc?
And it's not necessarily the change that you're going from grad student to postdoc. It's more you're taking somebody that's been listed on the NOGA as a key personnel and you're taking them off and adding somebody else. So it's more the change in key personnel, not really the title of the person. Does that make sense? Anything else? Nope. So what do prior approvals need? How do you do one? All requests for the NIH approval must be submitted in writing or via the ERA Commons. You have your choice. I think I still see predominantly it coming in via email. They should be submitted no later than 30 days before the proposed change. There are instances where we see that they come in afterwards and we'll give you a little tap on the hand and say, you shouldn't have done that. However, we will negotiate it with you, we will consider it, and then we will make our determination as to whether it's approved or not approved. These prior approvals should always, once again, our official communication should come from the authorized organizational representative. And when they come in to us, if they come to grants management, we send it to program. If program gets it, which has happened in the past, they send it to us. So it is an analysis and a review and a negotiation between grants management and the program office for approval or not approval.
But I will say in the policy statement, the requirement is that the prior approval come into the grants management official. That's what it says in the policy statement, and that's what we expect to happen. Because when we start getting into that, sending it to the program official, then we get off into these sidebar discussions. So we want the policy statement to be followed. The other thing I just wanted to add is that while we are still seeing some emails coming in for prior approval, ERA Commons is developing a module for prior approval where you'll be able to submit all of your requests via Commons through this prior approval module. At this time, it's not a requirement. At some time in the future, it will be. But right now, what we're doing is just developing the module, building upon the kinds of requests that come in. And we encourage you guys to use it and test it out and see how you like it. It really probably will save a lot of time.
And on prior approvals, only a response from the grants management office should be the approval. The PO should not be sending that approval to you. Any other NIH official, the GMO or the chief GMO or the GMS that has GMO authority should be the one that sends you the approval, and that is the valid approval. So, rule of thumb, whenever you're contemplating a post-award change or things are uncertain about the need for prior approval, consult in advance with your Office of Sponsored Programs first, or your Office of Research, or whatever you call it. Go to the NIH Grants Policy Statement, see if you can find the answer there, and if not, then come to the NIH Grants Management Official. All right. Now we're going to move on to reporting requirements. The main one that everybody knows about is the Research Performance Progress Report, which is the RPPR, the progress report, the whatever you want to call it. You may have a name that you just don't want to repeat for it, because it is a collaboration with your PI. He should be reporting the progress that happens in it. But then it has to be submitted through the authorized organizational official. Federal financial reports, the federal cash transaction report. Some grants require annual financial reports to be reported to NIH, but there is always the federal cash transaction report that has to go to PMS. Then you also have, for annual reporting, public access, which actually comes in or should come in with the RPPR. And at the same time, if there was any kind of financial conflict of interest report that was put in upon the making of the award, then on an annual basis, that financial conflict of interest report has to also be updated or resubmitted on an annual basis.
So we're going to hop in with a question we got, a follow-up to our previous question about changes in key personnel. So someone was asking if the grad or the postdoc that's being changed is not named as a key personnel, would it still warrant a prior approval from the personnel for the personnel or budget change?
No.
There's another question, since we're on grad students, I'm going to read that one first.
Sure. So they're asking, can you speak a bit about how to be compliant with the limits on graduate research assistant compensation? Many institutions' tuition and fees have grown by leaps and bounds, but the postdoc NRSA limit is fairly low.
The way to be compliant is to comply with the salary limits. NIH fully understands that 0 level is not reasonable, but that's what is required. And so that is what we expect for the institutions to adhere to. There's nothing that prohibits an institution for doing voluntary cost sharing to provide the grad student with the compensation that, as the stipend, as the compensation increases at the institutional level, the institution can provide that additional funding. But NIH will not allow anything beyond or above that 0 level to be charged to the grant. Anything in excess of that would be considered a disallowable cost.
I kind of look at it as like the salary cap.
Correct.
That's just a good analogy.
Correct.
Anything else? Nope. So the RPPR is the annual progress report for awards that are under SNAP. They are due 45 days prior to the anniversary date. Non-SNAP are 60 days prior to the anniversary date. And they must be submitted through the ERA Commons. And then to add to that, NIH has added a new human subject system, and it was launched in 2018, which is used to report on human subjects and clinical trial activities. And do you guys want to speak a little bit more?
I think she's going to go into it later, right?
Well,
human subjects.
yeah.
So I'll just speak to it really quickly now while we're on the topic. Okay. So as you may have seen with our last forms update at the beginning of in 2018, we created a new human subjects and clinical trials form. So this new human subjects system is basically the piece that goes along with that. So once you've submitted the human subjects or clinical trials form with your application, then when it's time to report on the RPPR, you're going to be providing all of your updates on the human subjects research through this system. So previously we had the inclusion management system, we had information that was entered via the RPPR, but now we have this central location where you're going to enter all of the information regarding human subjects. So it will pull in what you put in your application, and then you're going to provide updates on if you have enrollment records to provide, if you have changes to studies, delayed onset studies that may have started during the year. All of those changes that need to be in your RPPR will come in through the human subject system. And you'll see a link directly to the system in your RPPR when you're going into ERA Commons to prepare it.
Thank you.
We have a question?
Has there been any notice going out to the PIs that did their human subjects in Forms D, having to do the human subjects area that is basically required for Forms E now in their RPPRs? We're finding that we've got investigators that are doing their RPPRs right now that are now having to do all of the Forms E documents that they didn't have because they did their proposal and was awarded with the Forms D. So we're trying to figure out, were these PIs notified? It seems like they're very surprised by all the extra work that they're having to do now because it's in the Forms E system, basically.
So in other words, they were reviewed and awarded under Forms D, and they were following the Forms D requirements. Now they're in the RPPR segment, and they're now being required to follow the current forms.
Correct.
So we put out a guide notice about the new requirements, and I believe that it was effective with new awards. I need to go back and check to see whether or not we talked about grandfathering these other folks in. I don't know that we did that, and I'm not sure that that's the correct way forward. But let me look at that.
If you could.
Yeah, let me look at that.
Like I said, we have, right now, I've got a very frustrated PI.
Understood,
That's
yeah.
had to do a lot of work because
Absolutely.
his RPPR is due on Friday. And it's requiring all of this information that he had to put in, and he wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I know for the old inclusion system has actually gone away. So for inclusion reporting, I know that it is required for everybody going forward to be using
That
the
part
human
I
subject.
understand. And he was
clear,
okay
but
with
I
it.
think the issue is that there's additional data elements
Correct.
that they didn't collect before
Right.
that they're having to put in now. I think
And
that's
create.
the issue. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
So we're done with that? The Federal Financial Report, the SF 425 FFR. For most NIH awards, an FFR is submitted at the end of the competitive segment. We talked about they have 120 days after the end. For complex mechanisms or other awards not subject to, and here's streamlined non-competing award process or SNAP, the FFRs must be submitted annually. So clinical trials, cooperative agreements, program project grants, those are the ones that the FFR is going to be submitted on an annual basis. Annual FFRs are due no later than 90 days after the end of the calendar quarter in which the budget period ends. So your quarters end March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, and December 31st. So say you have a grant that ended February 28th. You will have 90 days after March 30th. Make sense? When this first came about, I had to really think about it. So, okay, the FCTR, or the Federal Cash Transaction Report, is a portion of the SF 425, which is submitted quarterly in the payment management system. Due to the
that should say due 30 days
Yeah, I was gonna
following.
say,
That's a
that
typo.
didn't-
Sorry about that. Not
30
3 days.
following the calendar quarter end. The reports actually report the disbursements of the grant. It also has a section on it that has the drawdowns on it, but it's predominantly the disbursements that we're looking at. And it must reconcile with the FFR.
At some point.
At some point, especially at the end of it.
Yes. So we got a question about PMS a little while ago that I was saving for when we got to this topic. But if the institution notices a difference between their notice of a grant award and the PMS award balances, what is the best course of action to have this corrected?
So the notice of award, in other words, the expenditures, I'm assuming, right?
Well, the expenditures.
No, they're saying the
notice of
actual
award.
authorization in PMS is different from the notice of award.
Who submitted this question? Can we get a clarification of the question? If we can get a clarification of that question.
Yeah,
before we
which
try to answer
number
it.
does it match? Yeah,
Right.
because the answer might differ.
Yeah, because what we award feeds directly into.
Right, so let's figure out let's move on until we can get a clarification on that one.
All right, we'll wait on that. And let's talk to the reconciliation with the expenditures. So, really, this is majorly important at the end of the grant for the final report. The final report must match what is in payment management. Otherwise, the document will not close. And if the document doesn't close and it continues to hang out there, at some point in time, PMS will close it. And when they do that, they de-obligate any funds that may be a difference. And if it is off so that it makes a federal debt for the grantee, then that's a bad thing. That can happen if the grant has been closed for a great amount of time, or it can be affected by the expiring funds, meaning our funds are only authorized and valid for 5 years. After that 5 years, the Treasury takes them back, and if the two reports don't jive, then whatever the difference is, again, can make a debt situation for the federal or for the grantee institution, and we don't want that to happen.
A lot of times, too, with this scenario that Dee is describing, most of the time that happens under multi-year funded awards, not necessarily with incremental awards, because typically it's first in, first out. But with the multi-year funded award, all of the funds are obligated up front. And so after that 5-year period, those funds expire and go back to Treasury. That's just the appropriations law. But for awards that have incremental funding, or you have large unobligated balances from previous years, that is where you could find yourself in a bit of a hairy situation. So we want to monitor those carefully and making sure that those funds are spent down timely.
Well, let me expand on the multi-year funded a little bit more because it's near and dear to my heart. For NIDDK, we have a special appropriations for type 1 diabetes. Well, a lot of those funds go forward as multi-year funded awards. Our end date for those awards are always June 30th, and then we ask you to be sure to fully report your expenditures as of July 31st on that PMS report. Well, when you do that, your final financial report has to match what you reported to payment management. And the main reason why is because by the time you report the final financial report 120 days after it ends, Treasury's already come in and taken any existing funds. So if your FFR doesn't match and those funds aren't there anymore, then again, you're put into a situation where it is a federal debt. Now, I will say this, because at my institute, I am in charge of the expiring funds. I, on a monthly basis, send, probably an annoying email to every multi-year funded grant to say, you have X amount left. If this is not spent by June 30th and reported by 7/31, then, you need to be sure that you report your FFR showing that it's spent. Or, but I do this every month. So.
In NIH Central, we've been trying to put out NIH guide reminders.
Yes.
We're going to be putting it in the Nexus as well so that grantees are made aware. Because a large part of the issue is that when a grantee loses the funding, then you're going to come back to the institute or center, not NIDDK, but any of them. And ask, can we have those funds restored? And what happens is that the institute and center now has to shift and look at current year funds where they didn't plan to provide that additional funding because the funds expired. And 9 times out of 10, that would be something that they would not allow. And most often, we try not to have them have you guys go directly to the chief GMO because we don't want to put the grants management officials in an awkward spot. The policy is that when the funds expire, the funds expire. And it's incumbent upon the recipients to manage and monitor that because you will likely not get any new funds to replace it.
And we did get a follow-up to the question about PMS. So it says we've had incidents where the total in PMS doesn't agree to our NOA, and this includes offsets. So it sounds like there might have been an issue with some carryover or offsets that was causing the numbers to be accurate. In that case, they would go to the grants management.
They would go to the
official,
grants
right?
management and ask the question, but if it is a situation where it is an offset, then the offset has been used to actually authorize a further award, which actually reduces their balance. If it's a carry forward situation, then it shouldn't make any difference in the amount. So, yeah, if they have that situation, then they need to go to the grants management official and ask, what is the difference? Why has this been, why is there a difference? Okay. We're going to move on to public access. So, 2008, NIH, it's a law. Public access, let me just put it out there, public law. So everybody has to be in compliance with the public access policy. It's been a statutory requirement for a long time, but NIH has put in policies and guidance and systems in order to ensure that we are compliant, and so therefore you have to be compliant. If the public access, if the publications are not compliant, if they're not in NCBI, if they're not, been published, then they're not compliant, then we will hold that award up until they become compliant. Okay? Policy applies to any manuscripts that are peer-reviewed, have been accepted for publication in a journal, and they are a direct result from direct funding from an NIH grant or
Uncooperative.
cooperative agreement. I'm having troubles with that word today, seriously. Proposals and reports must include citations for all applicable papers that are authored by the PI or arose from the PI's NIH funds. And I spoke to the NCBI. They have to use NCBI to enter the papers into the progress reports. The papers have to be associated electronically using the RPPR. And so here's a website on the additional information on public access policy. And if you guys have something to add to this, please do.
Nope, you're good.
You're good? Okay. FCOI, another topic that's very near and dear to my heart because it's directly underneath my purview in my job. And FCOI, financial conflict of interest, 42 CFR Part 50, Subpart F, objectivity of research, applies to all prime recipients, all subrecipients, all domestic and foreign, each investigator who is planning to participate in a project. However, it doesn't apply to Phase 1 SBIRs, but that's about the only thing it doesn't apply to. Okay? We have to know if there is a financial conflict of interest on any project in order to ensure that there is objectivity in the research. Because it can skew the public's view of whether we are funding research correct and whether everything's being done on the up and up. The investigator must disclose all significant financial interests. And that will be on the next slide what significant is. The institution is responsible for determining whether a significant financial interest are an FCOI or not, and when it is identified, they must submit a report to NIH prior to the expenditure of funds, or within 60 days of any subsequently identified FCOI. So if there's an FCOI that actually happens within the time period of the project, then that report must be made within 60 days of it being identified. The initial, I thought it was the next, did you switch the slide on me? They switched the slide on me, really? So significant financial interest is anything $5,000 or more, am I correct?
It's $5,000 or more in excess of interest, but they have to report all salary and compensation, and so it's all.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, the initial report must include grant number and PI. It must include the entity in which the investigator has the FCOI with. It needs to show the value of the financial interest, the nature of that conflict, a description of how the conflict relates to the NIH funding, or here the PHS funded research, the basis of the institution's determination for the conflict, and the key elements of the institution's management plan. So there should be a management plan that is actually included with this financial conflict of interest report. Every year, at the time of the RPPR, this has to be updated. If there's not any change, then on your end, you're going to put into the annual report that there's not been any change to the conflict of interest. The management plan is still going forward. You're still managing it the same way. And then on our end, the PO goes in and looks at it and says, okay, well, they're still managing. Everything looks okay, and they approve it. And then we move forward. If there's changes to the management plan, then that needs to be noted, and that needs to be said in the annual report. Any questions on that? Anything there?
We do have a couple of questions.
So yeah, we do have a question. It's about a little bit of a different topic, but is the prime recipient obligated to honor increases in their subcontractor's F&A rate that occur after the prime award has been made? Does this answer depend on whether the subrecipient is a research university or another type of institution, such as a hospital?
So I'm going to answer this in a couple of different ways. One, NIH does require recipients to honor the rate that was negotiated at the time of the award. The second is, if there is a change in the subcontract or the subrecipient rate, the prime can make that determination whether or not they determine to honor it. I would assume that it probably would not cause a change in scope indicator. But the main issue there then becomes the prime, if they decide to honor that rate, will not receive any additional funding to support that. So they'll have to rebudget within the current costs of the award. So that needs to be a discussion and agreement that is made when you are negotiating and working through your subrecipient agreements. Because if it's not, that could cause some challenges. So those kinds of things need to be addressed in that subrecipient agreement up front. Because if the prime decides that that's not what they're going to do, that needs to be stated to the subrecipient up front in that agreement, where both parties, both institutions sign and agree to those terms.
And we also have a question about prior approval. So do you evaluate a reduction in effort of 25% or more for each budget period or over the entire project period? For example, if a PI budgeted 1 month effort for each year over the 3 years, but only had 0.5 months effort in year 1, would that require sponsor approval?
It's annual.
Mm-hmm.
It is annual.
Yep.
All right, we're going to move on to the compliance requirements, which is where I'm going to turn it over to the two experts on compliance for a little while.
Okay, I'll make it snappy. Kristen told me to make it snappy. She was ready to do her game.
I have my Jeopardy game. I really want to do it, guys.
So I think for compliance, we talked a lot about prior to the award, pre-award requirements, and the fact that these risk management processes are in place to protect you, to protect the federal interests. We talked a lot about the notice of award being the legal binding document, and then the NIH grants policy statement being those standard terms and conditions of the award. And so I just want to make sure that through this compliance life cycle that folks understand from the time that we put out the funding opportunity announcement and the time that you apply to the time that we issue the award and you accept the terms to the time that it closes out, there are compliance requirements all the way through. And it is incumbent upon the NIH to make sure either via policy announcements, the grants policy statement, or your communications with both your program official as well as your grants management official, that we communicate those compliance requirements. If we don't do a good job in communicating, we then don't set our recipients up for success in managing those awards. And that's very, very important. My office approaches compliance in a way of partnership. We do not look at that as being a punitive action when we have to work with you all to make sure that if you're off track, we get you back on track. If there are situations and scenarios where something changes in the terms and conditions of the award, we encourage you to contact your grants management official or your program official. We also encourage you to contact the Division of Grants Policy. We have emails there, or the Compliance Office division under my office. We have an email address there. I think it's just really, really important for us to always remember that when these reports are due, they're due timely. If there's an anticipation that there will be a delay, communicate often and early. That's always the best scenario. It's not like the NIH and the officials, we understand that things happen. And so we will definitely work with you. If there's a scenario where you feel that the institute or center is not being reasonable, you have an opportunity to contact my office, and we can work with our institutes and centers to determine what those scenarios are and try to be as flexible as we can, but at the same time while moving you into the compliance category. I think I've kind of talked about the fact that if you are not familiar with your terms and conditions of the award, if you're not familiar with those administrative requirements in the grants policy statement, you're likely to move toward noncompliance. I encourage you to bookmark, and I still like to print paper and highlight and write. I'm just the old hat here, so I don't bookmark. I just have my papers and I have all these tabbies on them. It's kind of weird, but I do. And so, and also just to make sure that you understand that anytime that you set up the subrecipient consortium relationship, you got to make sure that those agreements are clear. You got to make sure as the prime recipient that you understand what you're going to be requiring from the subrecipients, because guess what? The terms and conditions flow down from the prime to the sub. So if there are any concerns or questions that you have with regard to that, it's important for you to understand them, contact us so we can help you understand so that those requirements flow down. And a large piece of helpful information that we found when we go out to do our proactive compliance site visits is just the lack of internal controls, not having the policies in place that are consistently applied. When you don't have those policies in place that are consistently applied, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up in a non-compliant situation, and we just don't want that. If you need assistance with setting those up, understanding what those look like, then we're here to help you with those as well. And so grants close out. Okay. Yeah, we can wrap up with grants close out. What they said.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the annual reports and all of those things that you need to submit. So once the grant is finally over, there are 3 required closeout documents that you have to submit, which includes the final federal financial report, the final invention statement, and the final RPPR. And these are all due within 120 days of the end of your award, and they're all submitted electronically via ERA Commons. And just for the final RPPR, I will point out the distinction between final and interim RPPRs. So if your investigator is submitting a competing continuation application, a Type 2 award, and that's under review while they're preparing their final RPPR, they would actually submit what's called an interim RPPR, which contains all the same information. If their competing award is funded, then that will just become the annual RPPR for that year. And then if they don't get their Type 2 competing continuation, that would become their final RPPR. And so, like I said, recipients have 120 days from the end of the project to submit those required closeout documents in ERA Commons. And after 120 days, NIH begins proceeding forward with what's called unilateral closeout, where basically we're closing the award unilaterally at the NIH level since we didn't receive what was needed from the recipient. And at 270 days, those delinquent awards are automatically closed at NIH. And as Dee was mentioning before, if you haven't reconciled all of your financial information and made sure things are correct, this could potentially put your institution in a debt status, which we don't want. And then lastly, just to give a little bit of a bigger picture of grants closeout. In 2016, Congress passed the Grants Oversight and New Efficiency Act, which basically told the agencies, you need to get it together and close things out more timely. We now have to provide annual reports to Congress on grants that have not closed. And so as of September of last year, NIH still had 3,000 awards sitting on this CONACT report. And so these are individual documents in PMS that we've been unable to get closed out due to reconciliation issues. So it's important to keep in mind that ERA captures those 3 closeout reports I was talking about, but the recipient institutions are responsible for that final step of going into PMS, submitting cash transaction reports, and making sure that everything reconciles. Because if that PMS information doesn't line up, we're never going to be able to close that account out in PMS without just unilaterally closing it out, and that causes a lot of heartburn for both you guys and for us.
And just to add to what Kristen is saying, I just want to put more of a political spin to that. It does not look good for agencies to have millions of dollars sitting in open documents in the payment management system. We are living in an environment of federal transparency, and you know, when OMB and Congress are told that we have millions of dollars and thousands of open records, while we close them at the agency level, but they're still sitting in on the books, you know, increases in NIH's budget and other federal agencies' budgets, that's not going to go over too well for very long. So we need to understand that Congress is looking at this, and they're looking at it carefully. And so it is so important for us to be able to have you do those reconciliations. Otherwise, we are going to have to move into a situation where it may put the recipient in a debt situation. And I'm saying this to get your attention and to have you guys pass this along to your colleagues in other recipient organizations. NIH will not tolerate the lack of reconciliations that have taken place over the years. It has to stop because it really is going to impact our budget, and we really just can't have that. That impacts your world, our world, and the world, and we want to make sure that research is kept at the top and at the highest levels of integrity.
Okay, and so since we're kind of close on time, I'm actually not going to go through all of the helpful resources that we have here, but they are on the slides. Lots of links for NIH websites and systems, FAQs that you can go and check out. So I think...
Are we going to have time for the game?
So we can play the game for just a couple minutes.
She is determined to make you guys play this game. I wanted to answer the question about the human subject system. And so what we did was we did put out a guide notice and notified grantees that NIH was going to migrate to this enrollment records that was in the IMS to HSS. And we said that we were going to do that no later than June 8th, 2018, and that updates that are not submitted in the human subject system would need to be re-entered. So that was put out in a guide notice, and so folks were notified. And maybe what we can do is send out a reminder via Nexus so that Dr. Lauer can make sure that folks are reminded of that, because I can see how that could be a source of frustration. Absolutely. Maybe that'll get them going, you think? No? No? Okay.
On the frustration side, yes. All right, so with our last couple minutes, how do I get up here? We're going to test your knowledge and see how much you actually remember from our presentation. So we might need Tara's help with the mic here a little bit. So we'll just go, we probably won't make it through the whole thing. But would anyone like to kick us off by picking a category? I'm assuming you're all familiar with the rules of Jeopardy, right? So we'll pick a category and I'll give you an answer, and then you can raise your hand and respond with the question that goes with it. And whoever gets the question right can pick the next category. Any volunteers to kick us off? Why don't we go with this lady right here in the middle in the white shirt? You don't have to answer the question, just pick one.
How about post award for 300?
300, all right. So the required submission method for annual progress reporting. Anyone remember? Oh, we've got a hand over here. Oh,
Commons.
What is electronic submission through ERA Commons? That's right. All right, would you like to pick the next category?
Let's do pre-award for 400.
You did it just right. That was great. True or false, so this isn't really an answer to a question, but a consortium budget must be included in a multi-PDPI application when the PDPIs are at different institutions. So this is kind of a challenging one. I don't know that we touched on it exactly today. But anybody got a guess? 50-50 chance.
You. No, him. He's pointing you. I'm pointing him.
If you're pointing to someone else, then you should.
He delegated it.
Well, I got a 50-50 chance on it, so I guess I'll go true.
True is the correct answer. And the reason for that is we make an award to one institution. So the main institution that's applying has to submit the award, and then you would have consortium agreements for all of your multi-PIs.
Good pick.
Yes, good job. All right, would you like to select the next category?
Sure. What about prior approval for 300?
All right. So another true or false. Changing multi-PI grant to a single PI grant does not require NIH prior approval. I know Dee talked about this, so you guys should know the answer to this question.
Tara?
False.
What is false? Prior approval request should include an impact statement on the scope of work and budget, since that is a significant change. Would you like to pick another category for us?
Sure, let's do prior approval for 400.
Fantastic. All right. The effort for PI of a grant changes from 7 calendar months to 1.2 calendar months effort. So what kind of prior approval might that indicate?
Yes, grab her.
Up, there you go, up in the front.
What is a reduction of more than 25% effort?
That's right, a significant change in the level of effort. Prior approval would be required since they're reducing by more than 25%. Nice job. You want to pick the next question?
Let's go with closeout for 500.
Woo!
All right, this report is due when the project period has ended and a competing renewal application has been submitted.
What is an interim RPPR?
You are correct. Good job.
I love it.
All right, select another question for us.
All right, Alex, can I have NERSA for 500?
All right, we didn't touch on NRSA a lot today, so hopefully guys know these. True or false? Recipients may supplement stipends from non-federal funds. So can they provide additional support to their NRSA folks with their own funds?
I'm going to guess what is true. I mean,
What is true? You are right. All right, so we can do a couple more if you want to pick another category.
sure, we're going to go for prior approval for 500.
Okay. True or false? NIH prior approval is not required to rebudget funds for any direct cost item that the applicable cost principles identify as requiring the agency's prior approval unless that cost is associated with or considered to be a change in scope. This is kind of a confusing.
We got 500. You gotta,
500, I'm
you
gonna
gotta earn
confuse
it.
you.
Yeah, you gotta earn that one.
So maybe we'll just give this one to you guys as a freebie. So this one is true. So across the government, there are lots of prior approval requirements, but NIH in general does not require for cost items prior approval unless it's specifically a significant rebudgeting or something that indicates a change in scope. Right, that's one of the expanded authorities.
Sorry, you stated unless it's a significant.
So rebudgeting that more than 25%.
Okay.
Things like equipment that's more than $20,000, the kind of bigger changes, significant changes, or if it is a change in scope.
Thank you.
Why don't you go ahead and pick another question
Okay,
for us?
the next one would be post awards for 500.
Okay. So we didn't talk too much about this, but suspension, termination, and withholding of support. So what might those be examples of?
The NIH hammer? That would be true. No.
What is the NIH hammer?
So that's one way of saying it. So these are remedies for noncompliance or enforcement actions that NIH may choose to take if you do not comply with the terms and conditions of your award.
After we try to work with you.
Yes, that's always the first step. All right, so do you want to pick another question?
Pre-award for 500.
So procedures that allow certain elements of an application to be submitted later in the application process after review when the application is being considered for funding. Come on, someone else. There, behind you. She's got it.
What is just in time?
That is right.
That is correct. What is just in time? You want to pick another question for us?
I'll do pre-award for 300.
Okay. So any cost incurred prior to the beginning date of the project period in anticipation of the award and at the applicant's own risk. I don't know if this was in our slides today. Anyone have a guess?
What is advanced spending or advance accounts?
So essentially, yeah, pre-award costs. So recipients have the ability to incur pre-award costs for up to 90 days before the project begins, but it is done at the recipient's own risk. All right, why don't we do one last question and then we'll wrap up? Do you want to pick another category for us since you got the answer?
Here you go. Sorry, close out for 400, please.
All right. This report is due when the project period has ended and a competing renewal application has not been submitted. It's a closeout report.
So we're going to pick Hila Zia on the iPad here. This is neat. They're actually
Oh, were they chiming in with the
responding,
answers?
right? So I hadn't even looked down, but I looked down and saw like they're getting it and like exclamation points. They know this stuff. So Hilo, what? Okay, wait a minute. Where are we now?
This report is due when the project period ends and there's no competing renewal under consideration. So the word's just over.
So we're going to wait for the response here on the iPad. This report is due when the project period has ended and a competing renewal application has not been submitted.
Come on, there's like 150 of them. Someone's got to have the answer.
I know, because what is SF 425?
Well, that is one of the closeout reports, so I will say that is correct. But the answer we were looking for is the final RPPR.
Well, Gila got it.
There we go.
Final RPPR.
Fantastic. So I think we'll leave it there.
Let's go.
We'll make sure you guys get all the updated slides and information so that you have it. Yeah. She has a question.
My final question is, the questions that were listed from online and that were asked during this segment, will those be added to the slide? Like when you issue out the new slides that will be posted?
If you guys give us the questions, we can definitely write.
We'll do a chat transcript.
Yeah.
Okay, and also, can this be sent out anyway, or is there any way to give
Yeah,
you?
we'll make sure you guys get this too. We just didn't want to give it to you ahead of time because then you'd have all the answers.
Understood. Thank you. This would be awesome.
Well, Tara had it. That's why she knew the answers.
She was studying.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.
Did you want to close this out? Thank you for our online participations as well.
Hey, Kristen, can you announce the code, please?
Oh, yep. I'm going to put the code back up on the screen for those of you who need your CEUs.